flashed through the shale gray sky overhead, so quickly it was no more than a line of light, and a distant screech almost lost in the wind. That's a Lambda-class shuttle. Thane Cairo pointed upward, jumping with excitement. Did you hear it? Did you, Delvin? His older brother cuffed him and sneered. You don't know what the ships look like. You're too little to know. Da? Am not. It was a Lambda, class shuttle. You can tell by the sound of the engines. Children, hush. Thane's mother never glanced back at them. She concentrated on holding up the hem of her saffron-colored robe so it wouldn't trail in the dust. I told you we ought to have brought the hovercraft. Instead, we're wandering down to Valentia on foot, like valley trash. The hangars will be a madhouse, insisted Thane's father, Horace Kyrell, with a contemptuous sniff. Thousands of people trying to land whether or not they've got a reservation. Do you want to spend our whole day fighting over docking rights? Better to do it this the boys can keep up well enough? Way. Dalvin could. He was 12 years old, long-limbed and proud to tower over his younger brother. For Thane, the downhill trek through the uneven mountain paths was harder going. So far, he was shorter than most boys his age. The large feet and hands that hinted at his future height were, for now, merely awkward. His reddish-blonde hair stuck to his sweaty forehead, and he wished his parents had let him wear his favorite boots instead of these shiny new ones, which pinched his toes at every step. But he would have made a more difficult trip than that to finally see TIE fighters and shuttles. Real spacecraft, not like some clunky old V-171. It was a Lambda, class shuttle, he muttered, hoping Dalvin wouldn't overhear. But he did. His older brother stiffened, and Thane prepared himself. Dalvin never hit him very hard when their parents were nearby, but those lesser shoves or punches were often a warning of worse to come later. This time, however, Dalvin did nothing. Maybe he was distracted by the promise of the spectacle they would see that day, the display of flying power and fighting techniques by vessels of the Imperial fleet. Or maybe Dalvin was embarrassed because he'd realized Thane had identified the ship when he couldn't. He says he's going to the Imperial Academy, Thane thought. But that's just because he thinks it will make him important. Dalvin doesn't know every single ship like I do. He doesn't study the manuals or practice with a glider. Dalvin will never be a real pilot, but I will. We should have left Thane at home with the housekeeper droid. Dalvin's voice had become sulky. He's too little for any of this. In another hour, he'll be whining to go home. I won't, Thane insisted. I'm old enough. Aren't I, Mama? Ganair Kyrell nodded absently. Of course you're old enough. You were born in the same year as the Empire itself, Thane. Never forget that. How could he forget when she'd reminded him at least 5 times already that day? He wanted to say so, but that would only earn him another cuff from Dalvin, or worse, a new barrage of insults from his father, whose words could cut deeper than any blade. Already he could sense them staring at him, waiting for any show of defiance or weakness. Thane turned as if he were looking down toward their destination, the city of Valentia, so neither his father nor Dalvin would see his expression. It was always better when they didn't know what Thane was thinking. He wasn't worried about his mother. She rarely noticed him at all. The wind tugged at his blue and gold embroidered cloak, and Thane shivered. Other worlds had to be warmer, brighter, busier, more fun in every way. He believed this despite never having visited another planet in his life. It was impossible to think that the vastness of the galaxy didn't contain some place better to be than here. Jellicon had been settled late in galactic history, probably because nobody else had been desperate enough to want a nearly uninhabitable rock at the very edge of the outer rim. Nearly 500 years before, an initial group of settlers had been exiled here from another world, equally obscure. They'd fought on the wrong side of some civil war or other. Thane didn't know the details. His parents had told him only that those first settlers had gotten themselves mired in the valleys, in nearly total poverty, and had barely been able to keep themselves alive. True civilization had only come later, 150 years ago, with the second wave of settlers, who had come here voluntarily in hopes of building their fortunes. They'd managed to establish mining, engage with galactic commerce, and lead modern lives unlike the people from the valleys, who behaved more like pre-technological nomads than modern people. Of course, they were Jellicani too, but they were unfriendly, isolated, and proud. Or maybe it was only that the Valley kindred were still mad about being dumped on this icy, rugged rock of a world. If so, Thane didn't blame them. A pity the Emperor himself won't be able to attend, his mother said. Wouldn't it have been something to see him for ourselves? Like the Emperor would ever come here. Thane knew better than to say that out loud. Everyone was supposed to love Emperor Palpatine. Everyone said he was the bravest, most intelligent person in the galaxy, that he was the one who had brought order after the chaos of the Clone Wars. Thane wondered if that was all true. Certainly Palpatine had made the Empire strong, and made himself the most powerful man within it. Thane didn't really care if the Emperor was nice or not. The Empire's coming was a good thing because it brought its ships with it. All he wanted was to see those ships, then later to learn to fly them, and finally to fly far away from here, never to return. Sienna, your eyes on the path or you'll fall. Sienna Ree couldn't stop staring into the gray sky. She could have sworn she'd heard a Lambda, class shuttle, and she wanted more than anything to see one too. But Mama, I know I heard a ship. It's always ships and flying with you. Her mother, Varen, chuckled softly and picked up her daughter, then placed her on the wide, furry back of the moonyak they were leading uphill toward Valentia. There. Save your strength for the big parade. Sienna buried her hands in the moonyak's shaggy hair. It smelled agreeably of musk and hay. Of home. As she peered upward, she saw a thin line in the clouds already disappearing, but evidence that the shuttle had been there. She shivered with excitement, then remembered to take hold of the braided leather bracelet around her wrist. Pressing the leather between her fingers, Sienna whispered, "Look through my eyes." Now her sister, Winnet, could see it too. Sienna. Her father must have heard her because he wore the sad smile that meant he was thinking of Winnet too. but he only patted his daughter's head and tucked one wayward black curl behind her ear. Finally, after 2 hours, trek upward, they reached Valencia. Sienna had never seen a real city before, except in hollows. Her parents rarely left their home valley and certainly had never taken her with them when they did, until today. Her eyes widened as she took in the buildings, carved into the pale white stone of the cliffs, some of them 10 or 15 stories high. They stretched along the side of the mountain as far as Sienna could see. All around the carved dwellings stood tents and awnings, dyed in a dozen brilliant colors and draped with fringe or beads. Imperial flags fluttered from poles newly jabbed into the ground or mounted in stone. Thronging the streets were more people than she'd ever seen together in her 8 years. Some were hawking food or souvenirs for the great occasion, imperial banners or small hollows of the emperor smiling benevolently, translucently, above a small iridescent disk. Most, however, walked along the same crowded roads as she and her family, all headed toward the ceremony. Even a few droids rolled, hovered, or shuffled through. The crowd, each of them shinier, and obviously far more modern than the one battered cutter droid in her village. Those people and droids would have been far more fascinating if they hadn't all been in her way. "Are we going to be late?" Sienna said. "I don't want to miss the ships." "We won't be late," her mother sighed. She'd said so many times that day, and Sienna knew she needed to be quiet. But then Varen Ree put her hands on her young daughter's shoulders. As soft as the gesture was, the Moonyak knew to stop walking forward. Mama's faded black cloak blew around her too thin body as she said, "I know you're excited, my heart. This is the biggest day of your life so far. Why shouldn't you be thrilled? But have faith. The Empire will be waiting for us when we finish traveling up the mountain, whenever that may be. All right?" Mama's smile could make Sienna feel like she'd stepped into a patch of sunshine. All right. It didn't matter when they finished climbing. The Empire would always be waiting for her. As Mama had promised, they reached the paddock in plenty of time. But as her parents were paying for a day's corralling and feed, Sienna heard the laughter. "Ceremony!" yelled a teenage second-wave boy. The livid red of his cloak reminded Sienna of an open sore. "They're going to stink up the entire place." Sienna felt her cheeks flush warm, but she refused to look at the kids taunting her any longer. Instead, she patted the Moonyak's side, blinked at her, patient as ever. "We'll come back for you later," she promised. "Don't be lonely." No taunts from some stupid big kids could make her ashamed of the beast. She loved it and its smell. Stupid second wavers didn't understand what it meant to be close to your animals, or to the land. Yet now that she saw hundreds of second wave folk in their long silken cloaks and richly quilted clothing, Sienna looked down at her light brown dress and felt shabby. Always before she had liked this dress, because the fabric was only slightly paler than her skin, and she liked that they matched. Now she noticed the ragged hem and the loose threads at the sleeves. Don't let them affect you. Her father's face had become tense, pinched. Their day is over, and they know it. "Perrin," whispered Sienna's mother as she clutched her husband's arm, "keep your voice down. Folk, they don't think about anything but lining their own pockets." That meant making money. Sienna knew this because her father said it often, always about the second wavers who lived in the highest mountains. She didn't see what was so bad about making money, really, but other things were more important, especially honor. Sienna and every other resident of the Jelucan valleys were descended from loyalists cast out of their homeworld after the overthrow of their king. One and all, their people had chosen exile rather than betray their allegiance to their leader. Hard as life on Jelucan was, unceasing as their labor and poverty had been ever since, the people of the valleys still took pride in their ancestors' choice. Like every other child in her village, Sienna had been raised knowing that her word was her bond and her honor the only possession that could ever truly matter. Let the second wavers strut around in their new coats and shiny jewelry. Sienna's plain cloak had been woven by her mother, the wool spun from their munyak's fur. Her leather bracelet was rebraided and expanded as she grew, so it would remain on her wrist her entire life. She owned little but everything. She had everything she did, contained meaning and value. People from the mountains couldn't understand that. As if he could read his daughter's thoughts, Paranri continued, "We'll have different opportunities now. Better ones. We've already seen that, haven't we?" Sienna's mother smiled as she wrapped her pale gray scarf more tightly around her hair. Just 3 days before, she'd been offered a supervisory position at the nearby mine, the kind of authority the second wavers tended to save for their own. But the Empire was in charge now. Everything would change. "You'll have more choices, Sienna. You have the chance to do more, to be more." Paranri smiled down at his daughter with stern but unmistakable pride. The forces guiding this. So far as Sienna could tell from the few hollows she'd ever been able to watch, most people in the galaxy no longer believed in the Force, the energy that allowed people to become one with the universe. Even she sometimes wondered whether there could ever have been such a thing as a Jedi Knight. The amazing tales the elders told of valiant heroes with lightsabers, who could bend minds, levitate objects, surely those were Rise. Only stories. But the Force had to be real, because it had brought the Empire to Jelucan to change all their futures, forever. People of Jelucan, today represents both an ending and a beginning, said the senior Imperial official at the celebration, a man called Grand Moff Tarkin. Tarkin continued, "On this day ends your isolation from the greater galaxy. Instead, Jelucan begins a new and glorious future by assuming its rightful place within the Empire." Applause and cheers filled the air, and Sienna clapped along with all the rest. But her sharp eyes picked out a few people who remained silent, elders mostly, who would have been alive since before the Clone Wars. They stood there, still and grave, more like mourners at a funeral or witnesses to public dishonor. One silver-haired, pale-skinned woman bowed her head, and a tear ran down her cheek. She had one daughter who died, did it if perhaps she'd had a son. In the wars, and seeing all these soldiers had reminded her of the loss, and made her sad on such a happy day. Because there were so many soldiers, officers in crisp black or gray uniforms and stormtroopers in gleaming white armor. And there seemed to be nearly as many ships as troops, hard-cornered TIE fighters black as obsidian, assault cruisers the same gray as mountain granite, and high above in orbit, twinkling like the South Star at morning, a few specks that she knew were actually star destroyers. Each and every Star Destroyer was bigger than the entire city of Valentia, they said, 2 or 3 times over. Just the thought of it made Sienna's heart swell with pride. Now she had become part of the Empire. Not only her planet, but she herself too. The Empire governed the whole galaxy. The Imperial fleet's power exceeded that of any other fighting force in all of history. Seeing the ships fly overhead in precise formation, never deviating from their prescribed paths, thrilled her to the bone. This was strength, grandeur, majesty. This was the kind of honor and discipline she'd been raised to value, but taken to heights of which she'd never dreamed. Nothing could be more beautiful than this, she thought. Unless someday she could actually fly one of those ships herself. Grand Moff Tarkin kept speaking, saying something about separatist worlds that made everybody seem uncomfortable for a moment. But then he went back to how great the Empire was and how proud everyone had to be. Sienna cheered when the others did, but by then she was wholly focused on the nearest ship, a shuttle just like the one she thought she'd seen in the sky. If only she could get a closer look. Maybe after the ceremony she could. When the speeches and music ended, the Kyrells had a private reception to attend with very important officials, and they told Dalvin to keep an eye on Thane. As they said the words, Thane silently estimated how long it would be before Dalvin ditched him to go hang out with friends. 5 minutes, he thought. 5 or 6. For once, he'd overestimated Dalvin, who'd abandoned his little brother after only 3 minutes. But Thane could take care of himself. More important, he could get a lot closer to the Imperial hangar on his own, although most of the Imperial ships had already zoomed back to their Star Destroyers, or to one of the new facilities being built on the southern plateaus. A few remained in the Imperial Hanan, the rest. A Lambda-class shuttle, just like the one Thane was certain he'd seen in the sky earlier. Sure, the signs said to stay back, but sometimes people assumed little kids couldn't read signs. Thane figured he was still young enough to get away with that excuse if anybody caught him. All he wanted to do was look at the ship up close, maybe touch it just once. So he crept around to the back of the raised stage erected for the day's speeches, then ducked under it. Although Thane had to keep his head low, he could run beneath it all the way to the hangar itself. When he emerged, he smiled with pride, then saw to his disappointment that he wasn't the only one who'd had that idea. Several other kids he knew from his school had gathered nearby, 2 slightly older boys, ones he'd never liked, and one other, a skinny girl dressed in shabby clothes that marked her as someone from the valleys, next to the brilliant crimson and gold of the boys. Robes her brown dress reminded Thane of an autumn leaf about to fall. "What are you doing here, valley scum?" said Mothar Drick, the grin on his broad face nastier than usual. The awestruck smile faded from the girl's face as she looked from the shuttlecraft toward her new tormentors. "I just wanted to see the ship. Same as you." Mothar made an obscene gesture. "Go back to your sty and slop out the dung. That's where you belong." The girl didn't budge. Instead, she balled her hands into fists. "If I were slopping out dung, I'd have to start with you." Thane laughed out loud. A few of the other boys saw him then. One of them said, "Hey, Thane, going to help take out the trash?" The girl they meant that they were going to beat up from the valleys. 6 of them, one of her. Those were the kind of odds that only appealed to a bully. Growing up with Oris Kyrell as a father had taught Thane many things. It had taught him how strictly and harshly rules could be enforced, taught him that his brother responded to their father's cruelty by being equally cruel to Thane, if not worse. Taught him that it didn't matter who was really right or wrong because the rules were set by whoever held the cane. Above all, it had taught him to hate bullies. Yeah, Thane said. I'll take out the trash. With that, he charged straight at Mothar. The idiot never saw it coming. His breath went out in a whiff of surprise as he landed on his back, hard. Thane got in a couple of punches before someone towed him off Mothar, and when he saw another of the boys reaching for his collar, he prepared for the inevitable fist to the face. But the skinny girl flung herself onto his attacker, pulling the boy's arm back. You let him go, she yelled. 2 against 6 still wasn't great odds, but the girl fought hard. Thane knew he did too, mostly because, thanks to Dalvin, he'd already learned how to take a hit and keep going. Still, the 2 of them were getting herded toward a corner. Thane already had a bloody lip, and this wasn't going to end well. What's going on here? Everyone froze. Only 5 meters away stood Grand Moff Tarkin, surrounded by Imperial officers and white-armored stormtroopers. At the sight of them, Mothar fled, his toadies at his heels. That left Thane and the girl standing there alone. Well? Tarkin said, strolling closer. His face could have been etched in a quartz crystal with its hard, pale lines. The girl stepped forward. It's my fault, she said. The other boys were going to beat me up, and he tried to stop them. Very silly of you, Tarkin said to Thane. He seemed amused. To fling yourself into a fight you would have lost. Never go up against superior forces. You, Thane thought fast. It did today because of. Tarkin chuckled. You realized an even stronger force would be along shortly then. Excellent strategic thinking. Well done, my boy. They were off the hook now, but the girl from the valleys didn't seem to know it. I wasn't supposed to be in the hangar, she said, head bowed. I broke a rule, but I didn't mean to do anything dishonorable. I only wanted to see the ships. Of course you did, Tarkin said, leaning down a bit closer to them. That tells me you're curious about the galaxy beyond Jelucan, and you 2 stayed when the other children ran. That tells me you're brave. Now I want to see if you're intelligent. What kind of ship do we have here? A Lambda, class shuttle, they said in unison, then looked at each other. Slowly the girl began to smile, and Thane did too. Very good. Tarkin held out one hand toward the ship. Would you like to look inside? Did he mean it? He did. Thane could hardly believe his luck as one of the stormtroopers opened the hatch for them. He and the girl ran inside, where everything was black and shiny and lit up with 100 small lights. They were shown into the cockpit and even got to sit. Just behind, rigid as a flagpole, his boots gleaming as brightly as the polished metal surrounding them. Show me the altitude control, he said. They both pointed to it instantly. Excellent. And the docking guide. You know that one as well? Yes. You're both very bright. What are your names? I'm Thane Kyrell. He wondered if Grand Moff Tarkin would recognize his last name. His parents insisted that the Imperial authorities would know them well. But Tarkin's face remained only vaguely curious. The little girl said, I'm Sienna Rhee, sir. Sir, He should have thought to call Tarkin Sir too. At least Tarkin didn't seem to mind. Wouldn't you like to serve the Emperor someday, and fly ships like these? Then you might become Captain Karel and Captain Ree. What would you think of that? Thane's chest swelled with pride. That would be the best thing ever. Sir! Tarkin laughed softly as he turned to one of the junior officers standing just behind him. You see, Piet, we should never hesitate to use the lash, when necessary. But there are moments when the lure is even more effective. Thane had no idea what that meant, and he didn't care either. All he knew was that he could no longer imagine any fate more glorious than becoming an officer in the Imperial fleet. From the grin on Sienna's face, he could tell she felt the same way. She whispered, "We'll have to study hard and practice flying." His answer made her face fall. "I don't have any ships to practice with, and our only simulator is old." Of course, they didn't have good simulators in the valleys, and probably only one person in 50th Theaid Valley kindred owned their own craft. Thane felt BA for a moment, until inspiration struck. "You can come practice with me, then." Sienna's face lit up. "Really? Sure. Lots of maneuvers could only be performed with a co-pilot. He would need a partner if he wanted to learn to fly well enough to get into the Imperious Starfleet someday. Besides, Thane could already tell, in spite of their differences, he and Sienna Ree were going to be friends. T-30 minutes remained until flying practice, hardly even enough time to get to the hangar by now. And Sienna still had to sit here on this stupid bench. No, she thought, it's not stupid. The Nier family's honor has been questioned. They need their friends to stand with them in their hour of trial, even if it means missing flying practice. But I would so much rather be flying. The rough-hewn granite bench stood in front of the small domed house of the Nier family, other kin of the valleys whose lands had bordered the Ree families for generations. In front of the bench lay a long trench filled with sand, which now had several flagpoles stuck in it, each flag representing a family that had declared its loyalty to the Niers during this dark time. The tradition was an ancient one, going back to the first days of settlement on Jellicoe, but it still had meaning. One member of every loyal family would remain with the Niers, constantly, until the cloud of suspicion over their honor had been cleared. Most of the valley kindred had brought a flag, but not all. Some few thought the father of the household was abusing his power as an imperial communications monitor, reporting meetings and messages that were private. However, Sienna's parents had declared that no one should even want to hide important information from the Empire, and those who accused the Niers were the ones without honor. Still, it was the Niers who had been accused, and they had to bear the weight. The family's genes passed down blonde hair and milk-white skin. Even so, their faces had gone paler, to the point where they all looked sick. If the formal complaint to the imperial governor was upheld and a new monitor was named, the Niers would share in that disgrace forever, a difficult threat to endure. So friends needed to stay close to them to provide what comfort they could. "I'd want someone to do that for me if I were falsely accused," Sienna thought. "But the Niers would be even more comforted if my parents were here, like they said they would be a whole hour ago." Sienna could see farther down into the valley, all the way to the distant silvery gleam of water several thousand meters below. Surrounding her were countless snowy peaks, like white claws scratching at a stone-colored sky. Her dark blue cloak was heavy enough not to be disturbed by the winds, and it also disguised the fact that instead of a traditional dress, she wore the oversized flight suit she'd managed to buy at a surplus store earlier that year. Then she heard the distant whir of a ridge crawler the mountain-ready hovercraft Empire. Backed merchants had introduced to the world 5 years before. Already Sienna could hardly remember how they'd managed without them. She still loved the old Moonyak, but he was even slower these days. When the ridge crawler rounded the bend, she wanted to leap up in delight. Finally! But she remained on the bench, face solemn, until her father had stepped out and walked over to her. He was alone. "Feet, where's Mama?" Sienna said as she rose to her. "Another late night at the mine." Her father shook his head. "We knew her role as supervisor would require hard work, and I'm proud of her, but I miss—" "Me too." And Sienna absolutely meant that. Yet she couldn't keep her eyes off the ridge crawler. If Papa would let her borrow it, she could still get to the hangar in time. Her father saw her haste and pressed his lips together in a thin line that threatened to become a frown. "Flying again today? Papa, please. How else am I supposed to get into one of the Imperial academies?" "You should practice, and often. Nothing would make your mother and me prouder than to see you become an Imperial officer." Perrin-Ree paused. A few birds flew overhead, screeching their usual calls. Sienna watched them fly, because whenever her father brought up this next subject, she found it hard even to look at him. "Sure enough," he continued, "we only wish you would practice more at the new simulators in Valencia, instead of spending all your time with that boy. Thane's my friend." She stressed the last word. "We shouldn't take anything from second waivers. We should rise by our own power, not because of their gifts." Sometimes Sienna flew into a rage at this point in the fight, but if she did that today, she definitely wouldn't get to fly. So she took a deep breath afore. She continued, "I help Thane as much as he helps me. We work together. Neither of us owes the other anything, and he remembers that as well as I do." Her father sighed. His kind have short memories. "But go. Take the ridge crawler. I'll ride the Moonyak home. Your mother and I will be back later, and you will have finished your lessons and cleaned the kitchen top to bottom." "Yes, sir." Her spirits lifted. She'd fly today after all. "Become a better pilot than this Chiral boy," said her father, as he straightened his robe and began to walk inside the Nier home. "If there's only one slot for a Jellicani cadet, I want it to be yours." Sienna laughed. "We're both going. The Imperial Starfleet won't be able to do without us." Even Papa had to smile. Thane wondered if he could manage to jar loose the restraining bolt on the CZI tutor droid. If so, then the droid would let him go, even if he hadn't completed his stupid mathematics test. "Your concentration is faltering," said CZI. "This is not conducive to optimal performance." Thane pointed to the nearest chrono. "I'm late for flying practice. You must complete your lessons in order to master the subject. How else will you gain admission to an Imperial Academy? Your parents' fondest hope is that we'll follow in Dalvin's footsteps. You." Sometimes Thane believed CZ. I was slyer than a droid ought to be. Nothing made Thane fume like the knowledge that Dalvin had somehow managed to get into one of the academies, one of the lesser ones. But still, Thane suspected his father might have bribed the local recruiter to admit his elder son to bolster the family pride. But Oris Carell wouldn't exert himself like that for Thane, who would have to get into the academy on his own. So he thought fast. I won't gain admission to an Imperial Academy if I can't fly well, Thane pointed out. And how can I fly well if I don't practice? Your family has its own hangar and aircraft. Therefore you can practice at any time. With his best smile, Thane said, but we also have you, CZI. That means I can take math lessons at any time, too. I can only fly with a partner when Sienna's free, and she's coming today. So doesn't it make sense for me to prioritize flight time? CZ. I cocked his head, and the faint. Back, I really ought to give you a lubrication bath. A nice long soak. It's been a while, hasn't it? A few more moments of silence followed before CZI said, Now that you mention it, my couplings have been stiff lately. With a grin, Thane snapped off the mathematics hollow and grabbed his flight jacket. I'll be home before my parents get back from that stupid banquet. Okay? And mathematics tomorrow morning. CZI called as Thane dashed out the door. His family had a private hangar, but as with most people on Jelucan, their territory ran more vertically than horizontally. Their gold-tiled home stretched almost the entire width of their property, mostly because his parents had insisted that people of their stature needed a home grander than the neighbors. The snobbery annoyed Thane less than the fact that this meant his hangar was 300 meters away, downhill. At least he'd figured out a solution. With a grin, Thane slid on his flight goggles and ran for the far ridge. The handlebars were in position and ready, so all he had to do was grab them tightly, release the brake, and jump. Immediately, he was zooming along the cable that led from his home to his hangar, dangling from the handlebars as he sped down the long ridge of stone. Cold mountain air whipped around him as he looked down into the valley far below. It wasn't as good as flying, but it came close. He reactivated the brake as he slid toward the end post, but only gradually, because he liked to have some velocity left at the end. Just before he would have crashed into the post, Thane let go and leaped to the ground, laughing out loud. Then he heard, You know, someday you're going to break your face on that thing. Thane turned to see Sienna standing there next to her family's clunky old ridge crawler. She looked even shorter and skinnier than she was in that oversized flight suit, and her face still appeared younger than with its rounded cheeks and snub nose. Her arms were folded across her chest, and she was trying to look stern, but he could see the smile hiding in her dark brown eyes. Her age. He righted himself and clapped his hands together to clean his gloves. You're just jealous because I never let you do it. Sienna stuck her tongue out at him. I could do it, you know. Even more than her parents hated him. The few times they'd met, his family had treated Sienna so rudely that it made Thane almost sick with shame. Sienna was no more eager to encounter the Kyrells again than they were to see her. However, the two of them always pretended there was no reason they shouldn't spend time together. It was easier than talking about how their families wanted them apart. Here I was worried about running late, Sienna continued, and I beat you here. Trigonometry, Thane grimaced, an expression Sienna matched. Come on, let's get started. Lizard, toad, snake for pilot? They each silently counted to 3 and held out their hands. Thane had gone for the snake, but Sienna chose lizard, and lizard ate snake. She beamed, and he gestured toward the V-171's hatch. Pilots first? He didn't actually mind being co-pilot, gunner. Cadets had to be expert at flying in both positions if they wanted to get into the academy. But sitting backward in the cockpit was never quite as much fun. Technically, the V-171 was Dalvin's. When he'd left for the academy, he'd given strict instructions that nobody was to fly it while he was gone. Thane never passed up an opportunity to fly or to get a little revenge on his older brother. "Hey," Sienna said. Thane realized he was just standing on the ladder instead of climbing inside the cockpit. "Still with me?" "Yeah." Thane slid into the ship while determinedly not looking at the front of Sienna's flight suit. "Sorry. Let's go." They slid on their helmets, buckled their harnesses, and lowered the hatch to seal themselves in. By now the procedure was second nature, something Thane could do without conscious thought. He knew the moment Sienna would start flipping the switches to activate the motor, and even the rhythm of her fingertips as she did it. His own console lit up in response. "All systems check out." "Confirmed we are ready for takeoff," she said. "Full thrusters. Let's grab some sky." Engines glowing blue on either side of them. Then they turned, banked, and soared away. The Sienna took them up higher, toward the peaks too cold and hostile for anyone to settle. A handful of mining droids dotted the landscape, gleaming darkly against snow and pale stone, but otherwise the area remained untouched. Thane felt as though he and Sienna had the world to themselves. When they flew near one of the eastern ridge arches, Sienna's voice crackled through his helmet speakers. "I see some icicles that need to be taught a lesson." "Got it?" The arch came into focus on his view screen grid. 3 icicles hung from the rock like stalactites, most of them about as thick as his arm. Big for an icicle's maul for a target. Thane took aim, fired, and sent shattered ice spraying into the air. He grinned as he heard Sienna's victory whoop. "Think you can find me a couple more targets?" he said. They never blasted indiscriminately, because a few falling rocks or icicles at this altitude could turn into an avalanche down at habitation levels. But he and Sienna had learned every place safe to shoot where lied. Thane knew exactly how she'd loop the ship downward. Even without guessing their exact destination, he could sense just from the slightest shift of their wings which way she would move next. He and Sienna had flown as a team every chance they'd had for the past 5 years. By now they worked together like two hands of the same pilot. The V-171 dived into Stepson's Gorge, a narrow, craggy pass that challenged ships at every turn. Sienna steered them down deep, no doubt intending to give Thane some practice targeting overhead. As they descended, they swooped past one of the many small waterfalls within the gorge. Despite the freezing chill, the falls still flowed, though more in a trickle than a gush. At that hour of the afternoon, the light caught the water at the perfect angle for a rainbow, and an icy outcropping nearby caught the prismatic light, reflecting it in a dozen directions at once. Every rock and line of snow seemed to glitter. It was one of those perfect moments, all the more spectacular because in an instant it would be gone, never to be seen again. Thane heard Sienna whisper, "Look through my eyes." He'd known she would say that. Maybe it was finally time to find out why. After flying practice, Sienna and Thane went to the fortress. So they'd named it when they were 8 years old and inclined to be dramatic. Really, the space was nothing but a cave, albeit a cave they'd spent several years fixing up to their satisfaction. Every few weeks, one of them would show up with something else to add to their collection. Most of the nicer stuff had been brought by Thankastovs from his family, luxuries they had tired of or would never miss. Siena's offerings were humbler, but she consoled herself by thinking they were more important. The fortress would have been incredibly uncomfortable without the thick blankets and hide rugs she'd brought. Those, too, were cast-offs, passed on by valley kindred, trying to modernize their dwellings to imperial standards. But they were warm and soft, the ideal lining for their nest hidden away from the world. Really, the cave was located fewer than 50 meters from the Kyrell family's hangar, but the mouth was tucked above one outcropping and overshadowed by another, making it so secret that Sienna sometimes thought she and Thane might be the first people in the history of Jolukan to walk inside. In short, it was the Mostly they visited the fortress together, talking about everything in the world and dreaming about their future among the stars. My father said it was 36 senators who walked out, Sienna said. Thane shrugged. He was less interested in politics than Sienna was, and continued lounging on the red rug, staring out at the sunset. What difference does it make whether it was 20 or 36? Out of hundreds of senators, that's not that either way. Many. They refuse to cast votes. They're going to be replaced by imperial appointment. That's a big deal, Thane. It's just some rich old politicians being self-important. That's their idea of fun. How could they betray their oaths? Their honor? Sienna still couldn't fully believe it. Everybody knows it was the Senate that steered the galaxy into civil war before the Emperor established order again. Why would anyone take the peace we have now for granted? Thane shrugged. Probably they're really fighting about something else entirely and just saying it's all about these high ideals. When they realize they don't have any power anymore, they'll come crawling back. You're really cynical sometimes. I'm right, though. You'll see. Sienna sighed as she lay back on the black gundark hide, its thick fur as cozy as any bed. From this angle, the sunset blazed magnificently just beyond the far ridge of mountains. The light glowing into the cave turned Thane's hair to true red and added warmth to his pale skin, and something about the way it fell made his face look startlingly older. He'll be handsome, she thought. Strange though it was to realize that, Sienna felt she was only being objective. It wasn't as if she and Thane were, as if they would ever. Well, they wouldn't. If her parents loathed her having a second wave boy for a friend, how would they react if she ever fell in love with one? And while Thane had never explicitly told her about the way his father treated him, she'd seen the bruises and sensed in his silences the things he hadn't said. Thane's father would do worse than that if he ever thought the two of them were together. Besides, she and Thane, maybe they were too close to each other to fall in love. Sometimes she felt that they were two parts of the same person. Hey, Thane said quietly, carefully. Can I ask something that might be, personal? What she was thinking about. Sienna sat up and hugged her knees to her chest. You can ask. I don't promise to answer. Fair enough. He paused again before continuing. Every once in a while, when we see something really amazing, you whisper, look through my eyes. Is that a valley thing? What does it mean? It was personal, but Sienna found she didn't mind Thane's knowing. Yes, it's one of our customs. A rarer one, though. See, when I was born, I was a twin. A twin? Thane sat up straight. Even a second waver would be intrigued. Most planets had myths and legends about twins. For real? But I thought you were an only child. I am now. My sister Winnet died only a few hours after we were born. Oh, sorry. No, it's all right. It's not as if I remember her or anything, but I live my life for both of us. Sienna held up her arm to show off her leather bracelet. Didn't you ever notice that I never take this off? Well, yeah, but I thought you just liked it. Sienna ran her fingertip along the braid. I wear it as a symbol that I'm still tied to Winnet. All my life, everything I do, everything I see, it's as much of the amazing, or sometimes even things that are especially bad. I say those words. My sister looks through my eyes, and I show her the most important moments of my life. Thane leaned back on the rug. That's really great. I mean it. Sienna nodded. Sometimes it feels like this huge responsibility, living for Winnet too, but mostly it reminds me to look for what's truly special. Maybe I wouldn't see so much of that if I weren't looking for her. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon. Although light still suffused the lower part of the sky, higher up the blue had become dark enough to reveal small twinkling points of light. Sienna whispered, Someday, once we've made it to the academy, I'm going to show her the stars. Chapter 2, when they were 14. Come on, Thane said. He sat opposite her, cross-legged deep within the fortress. You know this? Do I? This guy started a war. Sienna's head swam. They'd been reviewing galactic history for 3 hours now. Okay. The criminal gang that interfered with a legal execution on Geonosis and sparked the Clone Wars was led by... She shut her eyes, winced, and said, Mace Windu? Then she opened her eyes again to see Thane grinning at her. See? You knew it all along. 12. Next to them, the CZ. I droid clucked approvingly. Your grasp of history is excellent, Miss Ree. In my opinion, you should be much more worried about calculus. Her face fell. Thane glared at CZ. I knew we should have installed the tact upgrade. What use is tact if it keeps you from learning? CZ. I shuffled closer, his ancient joints no longer easy to move. When you first smuggled me into the ridge crawler to bring me here for study sessions, you said I was to ensure that both of you passed the exams. I can't do that by pretending you understand certain subjects when don't. You Y3HT Mo. Sienna could have groaned in despair. These weren't even the entrance exams for the academy. These would only allow her to qualify for the academy's preparatory courses. If these tests are kicking my butt, how can I ever pass the real ones? She tried to make it a joke, but her voice cracked. Thane heard her. Hey, he said, leaning closer. You're smart enough. You're strong enough. You can fly any single pilot ship in the Imperial Starfleet, and I bet could even handle a Star Destroyer on your Yuon, if they gave you the chance. Tishi had to laugh. I doubt it. I don't doubt it. His words became firmer, more forceful. I don't doubt you. So stop doubting yourself, okay? We can do this. Sienna repeated the words to make herself believe them. When they were 15. Tyrell, the Ena endurance and agility. Coach stood over Thane, who lay panting on the ground. Get it in gear, or get out for good. On bad one. Bah, every month. In the preparatory track, they had to run a different obstacle course. Gradually, the courses became more difficult, even dangerous. If would-be cadets broke a limb or gained a scar, it was just proof that they weren't fit to be there in the first place. Not finishing the course. It didn't get you automatically expelled, but it put you really high on the list of kids who would be first to go. But his back and shoulders hurt so much. Up! Hey! Sienna kneeled beside him. Come on! Get! Thane shook his head. His muscles quivered with exhaustion. Beneath his loose black E in a gear, bruises and cuts burned with each movement he made. He'd had less than 2 hours sleep. Every muscle ached. His bones felt heavier than carbonite. I can't. Like hell you can't. Moment their eyes met, Thane realized he wouldn't be able to hide the truth from her. Last night, my dad... Normally, Oris Kyrell lectured his sons. Often he caned them, but only for a few strokes. However, the night before, his wrath had exploded as never before. Thane had not realized he needed to fight back until he was too injured to do so. His father's punches and kicks had not stopped until Thane was on the floor bleeding. Neither of his parents had helped him up afterward, nor had they acknowledged his injuries in the morning. Apparently, they were determined to pretend the incident had never happened. Bruised and aching, Thane had to bear the truth alone at least, until Sienna's eyes widened in understanding. You can still do it, she whispered. You got this far, right? I'll try, he said, between deep gulping breaths. But you have to get back on the course. You're losing time. I'm ranked number 1 in E and A, remember? I can afford to lose a few minutes and the first swear to you right now, Thane Kyrell. If I have to pick you up and carry you to the end of the course, I will. I appreciate the offer, but I don't think that. More students ran past them, vaulting over the next high barrier, with only a few grunts and groans from those who had touched the sharp edges. These were the slowest kids, or close to it. Sienna would finish last, and Thane didn't expect to finish at all. He rolled over to look her in the face so maybe she'd see how deeply he meant it. Go. Sienna only leaned closer. Thane, don't let your father win. Hatred of his father did what hope couldn't. Fueled by pure spite, Thane struggled to his knees, then to his feet. Though he staggered at first, he managed to catch himself. Ready to run? Sienna began bouncing on her heels, eager to get moving. Yeah. Thane took a deep breath. I'm ready. Somehow he hurled himself over the barrier. Although Thane made it to the end in last place, he made it. Afterward, in the privacy of the gear room, he sat on the bench, carefully stripped off his shirt, and let Sienna see the worst of it. The shame made his face burn, even though he knew he wasn't the one who ought to be ashamed. Here he was, showing Sienna how he let himself get beaten, until the skin of his back split open. If she pitied him, or said she felt sorry for him, Thane thought he might have to walk out. But Sienna said nothing. Silently, she opened the first aid kit and set to work applying curative skin sealant, closing each cut one at a time until Thane felt whole again. When they were 16, Only a handful of kids from the entire planet of Jellican would make it into one of the Imperial Academies. While inner rim worlds often fielded thousands of candidates, slots were still strictly limited for citizens of former separatist worlds. The academy instructors themselves sorted students. At the same moment applicants found out whether they'd gotten in, they learned which school they'd been slotted into, which planet they'd be living on within 2 weeks' time. Dog Road? Shiena didn't care which academy it was. Any planet would do, just as long as she got to be an Imperial Iwa cadet. X. On the morning results were to be announced, their entire class congregated in the school's courtyard. Parents weren't allowed on school grounds. Only students and Imperial officials, but families lingered outside. Afterward, there would be celebrations, or consolations. For now, Sienna, Thane, and the other applicants only had each other. I couldn't sleep, she confessed to Thane, as they stood together near the far left of the courtyard, staring at the door where the proctor would appear with the announcements. At all. Me either. Thane gave her a crooked smile. That gave me time to think of a few backup plans for us. Sienna held up her hands in protest. She'd refused even to consider alternate career paths because it felt like bad luck. Thane scoffed. Come on, Sienna. We took the tests. The decision's already been made. So we can't jinx ourselves at this point. It was true. More than that. From the tone of Thane's voice, Sienna had figured out that these plans weren't for real. Okay, fine. Let me hear it. 1. We become famous acrobats. Acrobats? Famous acrobats. There's no glory in being mediocre, unknown acrobats. If we're going to do this, we have to do it right. The proctor would walk out any moment. The crowd's buzzing grew louder, more tense. Sienna's heart raced, but she tried to match Thane's playful tone. I'll pass. Any other bright ideas for our future? You said that was only number 1. 2. We travel the galaxy as drummer and exotic dancer. She raised her eyebrows. Excuse me, but I'm not becoming an exotic dancer. Who said were? I'll do the dancing. You the drum? Get. This time her laughter was genuine. Only if I get to design your costume. Maybe I should move on to plan 3. Then Thane straightened, eyes widening as the door opened and the proctor walked out. His black uniform seemed to steal the sunlight from the day. Sienna's gut clenched, but like all the other students, she immediately stood at attention and remained perfectly silent. Amplifier droids hovered nearby, catching the proctor's voice as he said, "The following is a list of all the school's successful applicants to the various Imperial Academies. For the Imperial Academy on Arcanus." Sienna could have groaned. They were going in alphabetical order by school? They might not know until Ferry End whether they'd made it in or not. She cool imagined standing there at attention, minutes draining away as the terrible realization of her failure sank high. Then she would have to slink out, humiliated. Failure wasn't the same as dishonor, but it felt like it at the moment. A few minutes into the ceremony, which already felt as though it had lasted forever, the proctor stood up straighter. For the Royal Imperial Academy on Coruscant, no school in the entire galaxy was more prestigious. No other training came closer to ensuring a high-level career in the Imperial Starfleet. Sienna had dreamed of going there, which was surely why she imagined the proctors speaking her name. But no, He'd really said Thane Kyrell and Sienna Ree, both of them together. She remained at attention, but she glanced sideways at Thane. If he'd heard it too, it was definitely for real. Sure enough, he was smiling, but a weary smile, like when he'd cleared the final barrier on an E in a course. Thane closed his eyes and whispered, seemingly to himself, "I'm out of here. I'm gone." Sienna knew why her friend wanted to leave this planet so badly. Those were reasons she didn't share. She loved Jellicon's stark beauty, the fellowship among the valley kindred. All of it was beautiful to her, yet she could leave her home world without regret. She wasn't escaping from anything. She was chasing her dream of becoming an Imperial officer, flinging herself joyfully into space. The day Thane left, Jellicon felt perfect, like he could do no wrong. Like all the constellations had finally aligned to guide him out. His parents said their goodbyes at the house and didn't bother taking him to the spaceport. It was a relief. Boarding the vessel to Coruscant was even more satisfying because Sienna was there too, though she remained on the boarding ramp hugging her parents so long that the captain threatened to leave her behind. Thane and she had become a team to get into the academy. It was only right that they should arrive there together. Best of all was the moment when the transport shuddered into hyperspace, their first experience of light speed, and the two of them grinned at each other in total delight. Then they arrived on Coruscant, and it was like getting punched in the face. Mill. Thane had always known Jellicon was a backwater world. Holos had told him the galaxy was far bigger and more sophisticated than anything he'd ever had the chance to see before. So he'd thought he was prepared. But when he stepped off the ship and saw Coruscant for the first time, gasped. The buildings stood as high as Jellicon's mountains. Although sunlight slipped through various glass structures, the overall effect was one of profound claustrophobia. The ground was impossibly far below, and the sky was cut into thin slivers. Hundreds of smaller aircraft zoomed or hovered between skyscrapers in a nonstop buzz of negotiation and commerce. Every single person seemed to have direction and purpose, to be perfectly at home in this huge metal, this city that had swallowed a world. Thane, however, tried not to look out the windows any longer because the view made him feel so small. Cage. At first he thought Sienna would be even more overcome. Her childhood had been spent in the open valleys, in houses only slightly more sophisticated than tents. Surely this would be too much for her. Patsy? Instead, she was elated. This is where everything happens. She gushed as the two of them walked through the corridors of the spaceport, buoy droids floating ahead as beacons to guide them toward the Academy shuttle. It's like electricity, this incredible energy all around. Don't you feel it? Definitely, Thane said. Totally electric. Sienna gave him a look. Hey, are you all right? But then they'd reached the shuttle, along with a handful of new cadets, and they got caught up in the whirl of activity that was the first day of attendance, collecting data chips with the information they'd need, learning about tonight's reception for all cadets, and introducing themselves to cadets from other worlds. Imperial officers, stiff and correct in dress uniforms, moved among them as the shuttle pulled away and joined the dizzyingly swift Coruscant air traffic. Thane had to keep himself from flinching every time another craft came within 2 wingtips. But in a planet-sized metropolis, apparently pilots were used to small margins of error. The intensity only sharpened when they reached the academy itself. As the new cadets walked out of the shuttle, Thane realized hundreds of students were already there. Hundreds more seemed likely to pour out of the other shuttles coming up behind them. The entire time he was checking in, he couldn't help feeling lost. When he glanced towards Sienna, she was smiling even more brightly. Before long, they were separated from each other in the crush of people trying to figure out where they should be. Thane's data chip gave him the location of High dorm room and the information that he'd have 2 roommates. They couldn't be worse than Dalvin. He, though, determined to make the best of it. Still, as he raised his hand to hit the door chime, Thane felt unbelievably small. The door swooshed open to reveal a slim, black-haired guy with a narrow face and rigid bearing. So correct that it took Thane a moment to realize this was no administrator but one of his roommates. "So you're the one from, what's it called, Jelucan?" When Thane nodded, the guy scoffed. "Why did you bother ringing the chime of your own room? It's ridiculous." "Charming, isn't he?" said another guy, the tallest of the 3, stick-thin and long-faced, with long brown hair he'd knotted at the back of his head. His accent was aristocratic, but his smile infectious. "Mr. Personality here is Ved Foslow, native to Coruscant." "Of course," Ved cut in, lifting his chin. "My father, General Foslow, works in Central Intelligence, and as you can see, he manages to work in a reference to his father within the first minute of meeting anybody." As Ved scowled, the tall guy stepped closer to shake Thane's hand. "Me, I'm Nash Windrider from Alderaan, and my father makes carpets. Impressed yet?" "Very." Thane realized he'd started to smile. "Mine does slightly dishonest accounting." "Get always handy," Nash said. "You never know when you're going to need to cook the books. Come in and comfortable as you can be on the lower bunk, that is. We grabbed the 2 best bunks already." Nash turned out to have traveled to more than a dozen worlds already, and had visited Coruscant several times. He didn't even ask Thane whether he'd been intimidated at first. He assumed as much, and swore everybody felt that way the first time they landed on the planet. "They should pass out inhalers at the spaceports," Nash said as they hung out, sprawled on their beds to await the welcoming ceremony and dinner that night. "Or tranquilizers, something to help people deal." "I don't see what's so strange about Coruscant." Ved remained completely stiff, but overall didn't seem so bad. "Have you really never been to a real city before? Or any other core world at all?" Already Thane knew honesty would serve him best. "Nope." He stretched out on the bunk beneath Ved's, trying to get used to the hard mattress. "Never even been to a city bigger than Valentia back home. And I'm guessing the entire population of Valentia would fill about 7 levels of this one building." Nash rested his hands beneath his head. "You'll get used to it, Thane. Soon we'll all be Imperial officers. And you'll have traveled to 100 worlds, and when you go home, you'll be as jaded as Mr. General's son here." Ved gave Nash a dirty look, but Thane couldn't help laughing. Did. Sienna had trusted she'd like her new roommates and enjoy the reception, but so far the afternoon was exceeding even her best expectations. She stood in front of the mirror, astonished to see herself in the cadet's uniform. Black boots, Dark trousers, dark jacket. It was like a vision out of a dream. I hate these boots, said her roommate Kendi Ideal, who scowled down at hers from where she stood nearby. Then again, I hate shoes, period. When grow up on a tropical world, you love barefoot best. You'll soon be accustomed to them, promised their third roomie, Jude Edivon. She was as tall as Kendi was short, as pale as Kendi and Sienna were dark. Bare feet might be great on Ilo, but on Coruscant, your feet would quickly become dirty. Plus, the likelihood of scrapes, small cuts, and potential infection would be high. Not that hygiene levels aren't good here, but the sheer size of the populace suggests. Are you going to start quoting statistics again? Andy groaned. It's okay to be a science geek, Sienna said. Quote as many statistics as you like, Jude. Kendi and I will get used to it eventually. Jude's lightly freckled face lit up with a smile. Our personalities seem to be compatible. I think you and I will get along very well. We will too, Kendi promised. Ignore my being grumpy. I'm just space-lagged and tired, and trying to get the hang of these damned braids. Sienna had been wearing her hair pinned back in tight braids for years, ever since she'd learned that this was mandatory for all long-haired cadets. Here, let me. Kendi's dark green hair was straight and silky totally, unlike Sienna's tight curls, but she figured a braid was a braid. Did you really never practice fixing it? Not even once. I thought it would be easy. Kendi sighed. Thanks for this, by the way, no problem. Jude leaned closer. You could simply cut your hair short as I have. That provides optimal efficiency. Kendi made a face. On Ilo, only little children wear their hair short. Growing it long means you're really an adult. No way am I sawing it off now. You'll get the hang of the braids soon, Sienna promised.
You'll have to, because I'm not doing your hair every morning. Even if I promise to make your bed before inspections?
No. Somehow they made it to the ceremony on time, with their uniforms perfect. More than 8,000 students were in Sienna's class. A stunning number. To her, but a charge went through her at the sight of them all dressed in imperial regalia, brought together by a common purpose, a common dream. Every single one of those cadets had traveled there, from hundreds of worlds, to make themselves the best officers they could possibly be. They'd come to serve the Empire, to make the entire galaxy better through their service. Her heart felt so full that Sienna put one hand to her chest. Was Thane doing better by now? He had to be. Her eyes searched the crowd for him. But that was one of the disadvantages of wearing uniforms. It was harder to tell people apart. She intended to locate him as soon as she could, then was taken aback by the Academy president's speech.
You are not here merely to learn military tactics or to practice flying starfighters,
Commandant Dienlark said, every word crisp. Those are important skills. Our students, you, are to be sure,
but we ask more of meant to become citizens of the Empire, to think of themselves as patriots and soldiers first. Can you stop thinking of yourself as a native of your home planet and begin thinking of yourself as an Imperial first?
An Imperial only. Can you accept that protecting and serving the world you came from is best accomplished by strengthening the Empire to which it belongs?
Sienna had never thought of belonging to the Empire as giving up Jelucan. To her, the two identities coexisted comfortably.
But maybe some students here came from worlds with rebellious senators, places disloyal to the emperor. They might need reassuring that they still could belong here at the academy. Don Dienlark continued. Some few of you have come here alongside friends from home, or have older siblings already in imperial service. Your natural tendency will be to seek these people out at every opportunity, and to rely on relationships you already have. But if that was all you meant to do, you might have well stayed at home, don't you think? A few people laughed obediently. Sienna felt stung. She and Thane weren't supposed to spend time together? At all? Well, at all was putting it too strongly. She decided. The instructors simply didn't want them to rely on each other completely. Yet that was what she and Thane had been doing for the past 8 years of their lives. After the ceremony and dinner ended, students milled around, introducing themselves to each other and sometimes not so subtly sizing up the competition. Sienna wanted to find Thane, though she told herself she shouldn't. Luckily, he found her. We both plan to serve the Empire for the rest of our lives, Thane said as they sat down in chairs facing the glittering cityscape beyond. We're never going back to Jelucan. Not to live anyway. So we don't have to worry about living in the past, or however Dienlark put it. Sometimes Thane could be very glib about authority figures, uninterested in rules, but Sienna thought he was more or less right about this. It looks like we'll share some classes and take some separately, so we can each make our own way here. This place scared the hell out of me at first, Thane confessed. You lived farther out in the countryside than I did, but it didn't faze you for a second. How did that happen? He was only joking, but Sienna answered him seriously. I was ready for Coruscant, because I've always dreamed of being here. You weren't ready because I think mostly you dreamed of getting away from Jelucan. Thane remained silent for a moment, and Sienna wished she could snatch the words back. But then finally he nodded. You're right. We shared the most important part of the dream, though, Sienna said. More than that. We got each other here. It's not coincidence that we both were admitted to the Royal Academy, you know. Flying together, studying together. We made each other so much better than we ever would have been on our own. Her throat tightened. Yeah, we did. Thane smiled as he shook his head, perhaps in disbelief at how far they'd already come, or how far they still had to go. Now it's the Academy's turn to make us better, to make us officers. It's going to happen. You'd better believe it. The window looking out on the Coruscant night reflected them slightly, superimposing their images over the buildings and hovercraft beyond. Sienna saw herself sitting next to Thane, both of them in the stiff, unfamiliar jackets and boots they'd been assigned today. Always they'd looked so different. Thane tall and pale, forever wearing the bright, elegant clothing of a second waver. Sienna dark and slim, in the simple homespun garments of the valleys. Now they wore the same uniform, and anyone could see that she and Thane were alike in the ways that mattered most. They sat there side by side for a moment longer before getting to their feet. Thane smiled down and whispered, You can do this, you know. So can you, Sienna said. They didn't have to lean on each other. They were more than ready to fly. Then they turned away from each other to walk into the crowd, meet new people, and become the citizens of the empire they were always meant to be. Himself to the limit every single day. 2 months into his first year, Thane decided he'd never had so much fun in his life. You must be kidding me, Nash panted, as the two of them ran their ninth lap around the Sky Loop, a track on the Academy's roof, high above most of the bustle of Coruscant. A cool cloud had settled around the building, enveloping them in pale fog. Getting up at dawn doing homework until midnight exercising until you vomit? Fun? Thane grinned as he wiped sweat from his forehead. Hell yeah, if this is how they have fun on Jellican, I think I'll vacation somewhere else. They crossed the finish line and slowed down, loping to a stop. After Nash had leaned over with his hands on his knees and taken a few deep breaths, he continued, Someday you've got to come with me to Alderaan. Trust me, we can show you a better time than this. Rude. Nash didn't get it. He couldn't. As the two of them walked toward the locker room, Thane tried to find the words. Most of my life, my parents fought me on everything I wanted to do, even getting ready for this place. I had to sneak around to practice flying with Sienna. Can you believe that? Ace and blow. Seriously? Nash shook his head in disbelief. Ree's one of the best pilots here. You could have gone to 20 different worlds and never found anyone better to fly with. Was it worth explaining the divide between the Jellicani Valley kindred and second-wave settlers? Thane decided to skip it. That was the kind of homeworld thinking the Academy instructors frowned upon. The point is, this is the first time in my life when I've been able to go after something I want without anybody getting in my way. Nash sighed. Sounds rough. On Alderaan, people are encouraged to learn and grow. All education is free, and people volunteer to teach various skills or crafts just for fun. Of course, someday the entire empire will be like that. Thane laughed, which made Nash frown. What's so funny? You, thinking the whole galaxy can turn into starshine and flowers, all because of the Empire. That's what the Empire is for, isn't it? Nash tried to wipe sweat from his face with his shirt, but finding it even sweatier, grimaced and let it fall. To take the best of every world, every culture, and spread it throughout every system? Thane shrugged. That was what the Galactic Republic was about, too. At least, they probably thought so at the beginning. But things fall apart. Don't let too many people hear you say that, all right? Nash glanced around them, but nobody was walking especially close. They might think you're disloyal. Whereas I, your friend, know that you're really a cynic. Guilty as charged. He'd learned his lesson the first time his parents sucked up in public to the same people they'd mocked in private. Appearances were deceiving. Well, someday you'll come to Alderaan with me and see for yourself how wonderful it is. Not even you could be cynical about world. To mine. Thane could tell Nash was homesick, so he decided to take his roommate's boasting about Alderaan at face value. For now, it sounds like a good place. I'd like to go sometime. Just wait, my friend. You're going to love it. So Thane had a voyage to Alderaan to look forward to. By then, every world he learned about had become a possible destination. What began as hunger simply to leave Jellican had ripened into genuine wanderlust. A career in the Imperial Starfleet would allow him to stand in the deep snows of ice planets, to dive into the depthless oceans of a water world, to bask in the searing heat of a beach beneath a binary star system. T and he got to fly every day, sometimes all day. Sure, at that point the cadets mostly used simulators, but they operated at a level of sophistication Thane had never seen before. From the outside, the simulators were stark globes of dull metal. On the inside, cadets found completely accurate cockpits, glowing control boards, and view screens that showed three-dimensional images of whatever starscape or planetary atmosphere they'd be training in that day. The flying felt absolutely genuine, and the challenges presented were more immediate, terrifying and plentiful than they were likely to encounter in real life, at least so far. One day Thane would try to bring a TIE fighter from deep space into atmosphere on a planet with gravity strong enough to crush a human. The next, he might maneuver a snowspeeder through a blizzard with winds that threatened to tear the metal plating from the hull. Some students tensed, panicking about their training scores or what it would be like when they had to do it in real life. Thane actually felt more relaxed when he was piloting. He couldn't wait to do it for real. Being at the controls of a vessel remained the purest kind of joy he knew. His combination of enthusiasm and steadiness showed in his scores, too. The class rankings always had Thane in one of the very top slots for piloting, and one of the few names that ever came in above his was Sienna Rees. They laughed about it together, congratulated each other for winning, and proudly declared they'd take back their title on the very next flight. Sienna had become his rival, but a friendly one. They saw each other more days than not, either in class or the main academy mess. Although the balance between maintaining their friendship and becoming citizens of the Empire was a delicate one, he felt they'd found it. While their meetings were often brief, they still got to hang out a couple of times a week hours when they let the competition drop. They knew they'd always made each other better by striving to match the other's skills, even at the academy. He and Sienna kept each other at the very top of their game. "It's ludicrous," Vedfoslow said sniffily one night after Sienna had reclaimed the top spot. "She took your rank away from you. Why are you so thrilled the competition is making her a better pilot? You should be trying to knock her down, not pick her up." "There's room for more than one of us in the graduating class," Thane shot back as he sat at the edge of his bunk, polishing his uniform boots. "Besides, isn't the goal to create the best Imperial officers possible? This way the Empire gets two great pilots, not just one." Ved shook his head. "Someday you'll understand." From his place beneath the thin gray blanket of his bunk, Nash laughed. "Admit it, Ved, you're only angry because Thane and Sienna always score higher than you. Despite your father being, what's his rank again?" "You know perfectly well," Ved said. Written on his face was his displeasure at being regularly bested by not one but two kids from a hunk of rock in the outer rim. Without another word, he buttoned his pajamas to the neck, like he did every night. The guy never relaxed. Otherwise, though, Ved wasn't a terrible roommate. He was clean, he didn't snore, and he didn't mind explaining the finer points of military culture on Coruscant. Meanwhile, between room inspections, Nash threw his stuff everywhere in a truly spectacular display of messiness. But aside from a few arguments about why it was gross for Nash's dirty socks to wind up on someone's toothbrush, he and Thane were unshakable friends. But the single best thing about Thane's first months at the academy was seeing Dalvin again. For most of Thane's life, he had been of an average height among his peers. Sometimes he'd looked at his statuesque mother, towering father, and lanky older brother in despair. There, too, he thought he'd be short-changed. A few months before he entered the academy, however, his body started making up for lost time. His leg bones ached at night, and he didn't seem able to eat enough to stop feeling hungry, and he needed new uniforms within 3 months of arriving. As he stood in the sector dispensary, waiting for his turn to get larger boots, he heard a droid's toneless voice. Ensign Kyrell, HJ-290. Packet ready. Thane frowned. He was still only a cadet, and his call number was A547. Yet he was sure he'd heard the name Kyrell. Then Dalvin stepped out of the milling crowd of waiting officers, hastily retrieving a uniform packet. He seemed to be in a hurry to go, but when he turned and saw his younger brother standing there, he froze in place as if aghast. "Dalvin?" Thane didn't know what to say. "Good to see you would be alive for either of them. Well, so? You haven't washed out yet. How astonishing." With that, Dalvin raised his chin, clearly ready to walk out. But Thane stood between him and the door, and he didn't move. "Ensign, you told us you'd made lieutenant. Is due to come through at any moment." Thane nodded. "Right, sure. Which is why you're picking up a new uniform, I guess." His voice trailed off as he saw the printed label on the bundle in Dalvin's arms. "Clerical staff, 3rd class. Lord Wolbegan," eyed he. "Goodbye." Dalvin hurried out, obviously determined to pretend Thane hadn't seen anything. Maybe it was cheap, even petty, but learning his overbearing older brother had been deemed better suited for desk chairs than star destroyers. It made Thane's day. That afternoon, as he headed up to the Sky Loop for an extra run, he imagined telling Sienna about the encounter. She loathed Dalvin almost as much as he did. It almost seemed to Thane that he could already hear her laughter, see her dark eyes shining with satisfaction on his behalf. Then he walked out onto the track to see several other cadets also working in additional exercise, Sienna among them. She wore the same stuff as every other cadet, gray shirt, black shorts, and regulation shoes. Sienna was only one of a few dozen people out there at the farthest edge of the track, yet he knew her instantly even across the length of the Sky Loop, even with the sun blazing down so brilliantly. Thane recognized that she ran, the shape of her black curls braided atway the nape of her neck. She's beautiful, he thought, a realization that startled him, then made him feel stupid. How could he not have noticed that about a girl he'd seen more days than not for the past 8 years? But that was precisely it. Thane knew Sienna too well to see her with any objectivity. Her face was as familiar to him as his own in the mirror, or it had been until now. The evidence of his blindness disturbed him. It was as if Sienna had transformed somehow and ought to have told him first. Possibilities he'd refused to consider in the past, now pushed their way into his mind, possibilities that were both exhilarating and frightening. He felt a shiver along his skin that he had always associated with flight, that exact moment when he left the earth and grabbed the sky. Thane decided not to think about it any longer. Instead, he would run, fast as he could, until he was worn out and half-dazed. When he saw Sienna again, he would be able to talk to her just like he always had. Nothing had to change. Hiring hand weapons had never been something Sienna dreamed about or practiced, and her initial marksmanship scores, while adequate, dragged down her overall ranking. So she spent a lot of free time on the practice range with the mock laser rifle, concentrating hard on improving her aim. Or, as was the case today, trying to concentrate with no help from her roommates. It was just an observation, Kendi said, attempting to look innocent and doing a terrible job. She stood in the next booth over, her white practice coveralls contrasting with the metallic black surfaces of the training range. You won't even admit Thane's looking good these days? Sienna focused on the holographic target coming toward her and fired 3 blasts at its head. Oh, Nell. I physiolo, this is a normal stage of physiological development. Jude sat on a bench behind the shooting booths, disassembling the laser rifle to see how quickly I could put it together again. Although I must say that in Thane's case development is proceeding very well. You guys, come on. I can't aim when I'm laughing. But Kendi wouldn't let the subject drop. Are honestly not at all interested in him? You, romantic or sexual relationships between cadets are forbidden. Jude could look very prim. Besides, Sienna has known Thane since they were children. It would be rational to conclude that at this point, their relationship is like that of brother and sister, and therefore no sexual feeling could be generated between them. Thane's not my brother. It's nothing like that. Sienna opened her mouth to say so, then closed it. Better for her friends to assume that was how she felt so they would stop asking her questions about Thane Cairo. The thing was, she wasn't exactly sure how to feel about him any longer. Before, they'd been together constantly, and she'd never had a moment to step back and wonder whether things could change between them. And if so, how? Their lives were both more PALL and more separate than ever before. DB. When Thane edged her out in the rankings or vice versa, they'd stare at each other and pretend anger that wasn't wholly pretend. At times, Sienna felt as if she could stand to be beaten by absolutely anyone else before she could endure it from Thane. Yet the next day, when she saw how well he had done, her face would light up with a smile. She'd seen him cheering for her in races, and cheered for him in turn. Their rivalry generated electricity that could turn ugly or could become concentrate, Sienna reminded herself. You're here to hit your targets. After the holograms came the droids, a dozen tiny spheres that darted through the range, daring her to hit them all. Sienna fired, red bolts blasting from her rifle, and refused to pause until she'd taken down every one. That's much better, Jude said, unnecessarily, as Sienna's score blinked on the screen above. Your accuracy scores are already above average for our class. Soon you'll reach the top quartile. Then you can stand alongside the sharpshooters, like me, like some pirate out of a Spice Runner holo. Kendi twirled her blaster before holstering it, which made Sienna laugh. She had no doubts that she would master shooting. Instead, Sienna's faith came from her sheer joy in the academy, and in Coruscant itself, although she loved and missed her life in the Jellicani valleys. Her universe had expanded 100-fold, and every new part of it seemed wonderful to her. To walk along corridors with members of a dozen different races, to hear their various languages with their unfamiliar syllables, whistles, and clicks, to look into the sky and spot a dozen different types of spacecraft every single day, it enthralled her. Sometimes Sienna felt as though she was whispering to her lost sister constantly, "Look through my eyes." There were infinite wonders to behold, and finally she had a chance to see them all. She experienced guiltier moments, though. Sienna found herself sometimes thinking of her former life as backward. Her life in the valleys had always been a happy one. No, she didn't possess any second waiver luxuries, but she didn't particularly want them. Besides, Thane's difficult family life had disabused her of any idea that wealthier people were automatically happier. Material things never had, and never would, mean much to her. So it wasn't the relative grandeur of Coruscant that tempted her. It was the richness of life here, the energy in the air, the lack of any need for ritual. Every forward step she took made her wonder if she was leaving her traditional values behind. Not entirely. Never entirely. She would never abandon the concept of honor, of the absolute need to keep her word, no matter what. That was as much a part of Sienna as her bones. She would also always carry her sister forward with her, allowing Winnet to look through her eyes. Yet now Sienna's perspective had been widened forever. Benjol worked winds. No longer did she look through the narrow prism of second wave versus valley. The huge difference she'd once perceived between her and Thane, it was nothing, really. It didn't exist. Sienna had believed in that divide for so long that she wasn't quite sure what to think once it was gone. Finally, they got to fly for real. "About time," Sienna said to Thane, who had walked into the low-altitude craft bay early just like she had. She couldn't help noticing how he came closer to her other cadet, into her personal space. Than any. "For what?" he said quickly, swerving away from her as though he feared an electrical shock. "It's not time for anything. About time for us to fly." Sienna gave him a look. Thane smiled unevenly. "Oh, right, of course. Definitely past time for that. I mean, never mind. Why is he acting so awkward?" Then again, Sienna realized she was hugging herself as though it were a cold Jellicani morning. She and Thane still got along well, but they were starting to have these moments of self-conscious weirdness. Maybe one of her friends had told someone that they were gossiping about how hot he was during target practice. Neither Jude nor Kendi would talk behind her back. Jude might be socially clueless enough to say the wrong thing in front of Nash or Ved. That would be the worst, especially since it seemed to make Thane want to pull back from her. "I said there wasn't anything between us, so he shouldn't be behaving this way. Unless he wants there to be something between us. But he doesn't, does he?" "Do I?" Sienna snapped herself out of it. Mama always told her not to make something out of nothing. She didn't need to jump to conclusions. She needed to get in the air. "You've practiced on the speeder bike simulator multiple times," said the commander who taught small craft flight. The several dozen pilots in Sienna's section, including her roommates, as well as Thane and his, stood in the craft bay within the enormous structure of the academy. Outside, dusk had fallen, and the city lights of Coruscant glittered. It is the most basic form of low-altitude craft, and therefore the first should master. Handling the bike should be well within the capacity of every cadet in this class. Sienna tried to disguise her excitement. She'd been in simulators too long, she was ready to go. And the speeder bikes seemed so easy. As if he'd heard her, the commander continued. In order to ensure that your first flight is both memorable and challenging, we've made it a competition. A race. Is there a prize? Called Nash Windrider, which made people laugh. Unlike most instructors, the flight commander allowed some levity from time to time. He said it bolstered martial spirit, which they were supposed to cultivate. The flight commander even smiled slightly as he replied, Indeed, Cadet Windrider, but you should for you presume to perform it. A three-dimensional map of the area surrounding the academy. Small, brightly colored points blinked in 10 different places, from all the way down at ground level up to the sky loop. What you see signposted here are Reitgen hoops, each big enough for a single speeder bike to easily pass through. We've cleared the surround individual Course Ing airspace, so you may choose your, and need only account for your classmates' vehicles. Farthest first, Sienna immediately decided. Most people will get too caught up in trying to reach the nearest hoop, so you'll have a clear course. Then you slip through the others on your way back here, the commander concluded. The first to fly through all 10 hoops will be given 50 points in the rankings. A shiver of disbelief and anticipation swept through the cadets. 50 points. That was better than acing 2 or even 3 exams. Cadets in ranking trouble knew this could pull them back from the brink. Meanwhile, Sienna could only think, this would do it. This would make me number 1, far ahead of anybody else. Eager, are you? The commander said. Then get to your craft and await the signal. Sienna dashed for her speeder bike and powered up. As the engines hummed to life, she checked the chin strap of her dark gray helmet and the armor. Important was the repulsor belt, which would activate if she fell from the bike. But she didn't intend to fall. This is going to be mine, she told herself as she took hold of the handlebars and felt the controls through her textured gloves. The engine beneath her vibrated with what she imagined was excitement, as if it were a spirited beast instead of a mere machine. The lights overhead shifted, turning slowly brighter. She held her breath. Then came the brilliant flash that meant go. His. Sienna gunned it as they all flew out in a rush, like a swarm of Dardanellian locusts. But as soon as she was free from the building, she pulled back, tempering her speed so as few people as possible would see her flight path and realize her plan. While most of the other speeder bikes rushed toward the nearest hoop, Sienna turned and spun away, heading toward the farthest target at top speed. She wasn't completely alone, though. Maybe a half-dozen other cadets had adopted this strategy, and of course one of them was Thane. As he leaned down over his handlebars, he caught her looking at him and grinned before swerving away. Sienna laughed out loud. They were back to Norma. The speeder bike, a light craft that responded well to its pilot's movements. Instead, the challenge came from choosing the best flight path. For adequate balance, speeder bikes needed to be within 20 meters of the ground, or at least a flat surface such as a larger craft, a machine, or a building. She slid over to the nearest mammoth structure and balanced her bike against its shiny surface, flying perpendicular to the ground at such speed that gravity no longer seemed to apply. Glowing windows rushed by beneath her with a ripple like sunlight on water. Shift! Sienna put the speeder bike in a spiral, zooming upward and over the tunnel, laced chasm below, until she was within a few meters of another, taller building, which she used as her new balance. That let her fly higher, faster, the wind stinging her face. Thank goodness for the goggles, she thought, then cursed mentally as she saw another bike beside her, which of course was Thane's. He shouted at her, voice only barely audible over the rushing air and humming engines. "This is going to be tight. Delbund aid, oh." "Too tight for you," she shouted, then laughed as she took the top edge of the building at a sharp angle. The first hoop glowed in front of her, brilliant yellow, aimed straight for the center of the hoop, and then as her bike and Thane's bumped, gasped. He wouldn't have meant to do that. Neither had she. They had each been so intensely focused on the goal that they'd forgotten to watch each other. The bump alone wasn't a big deal. Speeder bikes were built to take that kind of punishment. And worse. But to her horror, Sienna realized the front directional vanes of their bikes were locked together. "Pull!" Thane shouted, desperately jerking his bike to the right. She tried to yank left, but all they managed to do was wobble. Their speeder bikes couldn't be separated in flight. They'd have to stop, land, and forfeit. Sienna gasped as she realized how close they were to the Reitgen hoop. Too close to swerve away, they were on the verge of a crash even the repulsor field couldn't save them from. Instinctively, she aimed for the very center of the hoop, next to her. Thane did the exact same thing, at the exact same moment. They whooshed through the hoop with less than half a meter on either side of them. Her first thought was that they were lucky to be while locked direct. If she'd gotten into the situation with any other cadet, Sienna would have powered down and forced the forfeit. With Thane, though she knew what a good pilot he was, understood how he flew. Did they dare try it? She shouted, "Let's do this thing." "What, like this?" Thane put one hand near the power controls, but then paused as the idea sank in. Once again she saw him grin. "All right, here we go." Sienna plunged toward the next hoop, just as Thane did. They accelerated at the same time, simultaneously shifted direction and pitch. If they'd practiced this together, they couldn't have done it any more efficiently. The two speeder bikes seemed to have become one. The second hoop demanded that they slide through narrow passages between buildings that would have been a tight fit for one speeder bike, much less two. Together they tilted so that their bikes balanced against the left building, swooshing past one fellow cadet who had temporarily pulled ahead, and then dived toward the glowing yellow circle that marked their goal. Together, Sienna and Thane took the third hoop, down almost on the ground, wove through a web of the trenches of a spiral skyscraper to reach the fifth. Each goal seemed more impossible than the last, and the flying only became easier because she and Thane had this. Yet, she realized only two people who had spent years learning to fly together could ever coordinate so smoothly. The way she responded to Thane's piloting, the way he responded to hers, it didn't require thought. It was instinct, a part of them both. Those countless days soaring through the valleys of Jellucan had taught them to understand each other without words. The bonds they'd formed during those years weren't the kind that faded away. Top, when they dipped through the 10th hoop of the academy itself, she and Thane immediately banked and accelerated straight down the wall of the building. Sienna glanced over her shoulder and saw the blinking lights of other cadets, bikes swirling toward the bay like clouds of fireflies. They were close, but not close enough. Thane and Sienna plunged back into the docking bay first, a full 40 seconds ahead of their closest competitor. Landing the conjoined bikes turned out to be the toughest part. As they wobbled to the ground, NG to swoosh in behind, and, beside them, they heard Ved Foslow shout, "That's a disqualification." "It is not," Sienna shot back, removing her helmet and pushing her goggles up on her forehead. There weren't any rules about what would happen if two bikes locked together. Flying in that condition would have been more difficult rather than easier, pointed out Jude, still in her full flight gear. She had been even closer behind them than Ved. Therefore, it seems unfair to penalize them. Ved's deep golden complexion was now flushed with anger. "We're supposed to be learning how to properly fly a speeder bike. That's not exactly correct procedure, is it? Situations like that can happen in battle. Shouldn't we know how to deal with them?" Sienna felt almost sick. She hadn't broken a rule, or hadn't meant to, at any rate, and here was Ved Foslow questioning her honor. Was he accusing her of doing this on purpose? Of cheating? A small crowd had gathered by then, and the cadets parted to allow the instructor to walk closer. He said only, "That was novel." Thane leaned against his. "Only one person could win. You said the 50 points went to the first to finish. We finished first together, finding loopholes in instructions from superior officers? That's a bad habit, Kyrell." Slowly the commander shook his head as if in exasperation. "But far be it from me to penalize flying of that quality. You shared the challenge, so you'll split the prize. 25 points each to Ree and Kyrell." Ved Foslow threw his helmet down in disgust, but most of the cadets cheered. Thane took Sienna's hand and held it high. She laughed from pure exhilaration. "First in the class. I made it all the way to the Royal Academy of Coruscant, and I'm actually first in my class. 25 points was enough for that." But Sienna caught herself then, realizing she was probably tied with Thane for the honor. She found she didn't mind sharing, not with him. Thane let their hands fall, but he didn't let go right away. Sienna didn't let go either. Chapter 5. And nothing changed until the laser cannon project a few months later. Even the best battle plans put soldiers at risk, and at any time you could find yourself separated and in danger, your squadron pinned down or otherwise unable to help you. Your blaster could be damaged and, at any rate, couldn't defend you from an enemy ship on its own. If you quickly constructed a larger weapon, however, you could continue the fight alone, perhaps long enough to be rescued, but certainly long enough to make your enemy pay. A laser cannon could be built out of standard Imperial issue parts if you knew how. Thane disliked mechanical work. Flying and shooting were more his speed. But he was determined to ace this project. He and Sienna had held on to their top rankings so far. The only question remaining was which of them would finish the term at number 1. If Sienna beat him, he'd be the first to congratulate her. But hopefully she'd be the first to congratulate him. "Look at that grin," said Nash, who lay under his own laser cannon in progress, a couple of meters over in the enormous repair bay. "Thinking about our off day?" Ready to explore the Coruscant nightlife? From his place at the bench, Thane shrugged without looking away from the stormtrooper helmet he was currently cannibalizing for its power cell. I'm working on my cannon like you ought to be. Come on, Nash, focus. Bad blue Zoisaurus yas to be. How can I focus when we have a chance to go to clubs, cantinas, and 100 other places where we'll finally have a chance to meet girls? Nash protested. Girls who aren't forbidden like our fellow cadets. Touchable girls. Kissable girls. Vawud Nogsaw. I understand, okay? But I'm trying to concentrate here so I can keep my ranking. Plenty of people have put in extra time on this. Thane gestured to the rest of the repair bay for emphasis. A couple dozen other laser cannons sat all around them, protected by the small, sparkling hemispheres of low-charge force fields. Every single one of those machines might have been repaired more ingeniously than his own, with more inspired use of random spare parts that might be found in alien spaceports. Every single one of them counted as competition. Nash slid away from his own repair table, the better to give Thane a withering look. We've been working for a couple of hours now. We can't talk about the one day of real fun we'll get before the next term starts. I guess you sounded excited enough the other day when Ved told us the best clubs to visit. I was. I am. I'm excited, definitely. At this, Nash stood up and faced Thane across the array spare parts spread across the work table. And yet you don't seem excited. Not about meeting girls, at least. That means one of two things. Either you're interested in men instead, which I doubt, given your reaction to that risque holo of Ved's. The curse of fair skin was that even the faintest blush stood out. Thane tried to pretend he was still looking at the stormtrooper helmet. Or, there's a girl you're already interested in. A girl you already know. Nash leaned on the table, resting his chin on his hands, eyes wide open in mock innocence. Could this girl's name possibly rhyme with the syllables Hennessy? It's not like that between us, Thane insisted. It never has been. Nash's grin had turned wicked. But I suspect it will be. The subject irritated Thane more than it should have. He still wasn't sure what to make of the way his relationship with Sienna was changing, and he didn't want Nash sticking his long nose into it. Besides, even if Nash meant well, his insinuating tone reminded Thane too much of the way Dalvin had teased him about there being only one thing he could want from a girl of the valleys. Boul Dan-A. Talking about Sienna that way disrespected her, and made Thane think too much about things he couldn't even begin to change until graduation. We take these matters more seriously on Jellicoe than most people do, he said, truthfully enough. Speculating is improper. This from the man who watched that holo 5 times. Nash laughed out loud. Besides, you're supposed to stop being Jellicani and start being a citizen of the Empire, remember? And speculating is fun. I need you to listen to me. Thane put down his tools and looked Nash squarely in the face. This subject is permanently closed. There's nothing going on between me and Sienna. We're just good friends, Sienna said as she walked away from the martial arts room, every muscle aching. Always have been, always will be. That's all there is to it. Jude nodded her approval, then winced. Probably her head was still hurting from the last time Kendi had slammed her into the mat. Very wise of you. Given the prohibition on dating fellow cadets, neither you nor Thane would want to compromise your careers by violating such an important rule. Kendi, beaming, sweaty, and triumphant, just laughed at them both. I'd break the rules for a guy who looks that good. For a moment, Sienna felt a twinge of jealousy. That was not at all how she wanted to feel when it came to Thane, and yet it burned within her, an ember that refused to go dark. But Kendi was already moving on. So, what are we going to do with our free day? Personally, I don't care, Sienna said, as long as it involves eating real food. On Imperial ships, officers were encouraged to drink nutritive beverages instead of consuming food. It was more efficient in terms of both ship resources and officer time, and the medics insisted the nutritives were healthier too. They didn't taste bad, but they definitely didn't taste good. The academy mess served the nutritives, and like most students, Sienna had dutifully started getting used to them. But as long as she could enjoy some real, true, delicious food without guilt, she intended to indulge. I believe we will be able to find acceptable meals at virtually any potential destination, Jude said, then hesitated before making her suggestion. Would anyone else be interested in visiting the Museum of Multispecies Sciences? Kendi groaned, but Sienna shot her a look. Their third roommate was soft, spoken, patient, and accommodating. She deserved to get her way once in a while. Maybe we could go to the museum first thing in the morning. But in the afternoon, I'd rather do something less completely boring, cerebral. We study so hard here already, you know. I'd like to try something like, maybe, sea diving. Diving? Yes. Immediately, Kendi became excited. As a native of the tropical world of Ilo, she'd begun swimming even before she could walk. I can't believe it's been 6 months since I've been in the water. And no, Jude, swimming laps in the wave pool doesn't count. Jude didn't respond to that as they stepped into the lift. Already she was deep in thought. Diving would be a fascinating challenge. Bespin is a gas giant, which means we have no oceans or lakes. Swimming pools are rare luxuries. Therefore, my experience in the water is limited. The chance to expand my skills and observe marine life would be extremely pleasant. As the lift settled onto their floor, Sienna had to shake her head and smile. Everything's a science project to you, Jude. Science is the study of the entire material universe. Therefore, everything is science, whether you see it or not. Only the faintest smile on Jude's thin lips revealed that she was teasing them back. Sienna didn't mention what they might do that night. Inside, she hoped they'd be celebrating her finishing the term as number 1 in the class. But even saying that out loud sounded prideful. The only other possible candidate for number 1 was of course Thane, and if he won, she thought she could be happy for him. Maybe celebrate with him, toasting his success. She'd rather he toasted hers instead, but... Sienna? Kendi shot her a look as they walked toward their room. Your brain was in orbit for a second there. Sorry, I think my head's still scrambled from that time you flipped me. Sienna began untying the belt of her martial arts gear as the door swished open for them. Think you could show me how that's done? No way, Kendi said with a laugh. It's one of the only things I'm better at than you. Next morning came the inspection of the laser cannons. Sienna stood at attention before her cannon. which she'd assembled to perfection. She'd made a point of using the most ungainly salvage parts possible so the instructors would see that she could build one under even the most unfavorable conditions. Her gut told her Thane might not push as hard to make his own task more difficult. If she could gain an edge anywhere, that was it. Commander Harn walked along the rows of laser cannons, each one matched with a cadet at full attention. Although the repair bay was by its nature a place to work hard and get dirty, the gray rubberized floor and walls remained unstained by grease or scorch marks. Imperial discipline demanded perfect cleanliness, the erasure of every task as soon as it was done. Only Cadet Windrider's cannon displayed any smudges whatsoever as usual. Las D's boo. Harn nodded approval as Kendi's cannon powered up. He opened her control panel, then nodded in satisfaction at her choices of new parts. He didn't smile, though, not then or during the next several inspections, though he did murmur, "Innovative," when he looked over Ved's work. That made Ved smile so smugly that Sienna wanted to groan. She awaited her turn, started her engine, and watched as Harn checked the efficiency ratings and overall power. Although he did not speak, his eyes met hers as if he were assessing her anew and well. She'd impressed him. Somehow she managed to keep a straight face, even when Kendi mouthed, "Way to go," over the commander's shoulder. When Harn looked over Thane's cannon and reached for the starter, Sienna held her breath. But the laser cannon didn't power up at all. The color drained from Thane's face. Sienna didn't feel so good herself. She'd wanted to beat him, but not to see him fail completely. How is that even possible, she thought, gripping her hands together more tightly behind her back. Thane's not an instinctive mechanic, but he works hard and he's thorough, and he would have checked his cannon dozens of times. This can't be happening. A notation on the tablet he carried in one hand. "Let's went wrong. See where you..." Harn flipped open the control panel of Thane's laser cannon, then froze, his sharp features hardening into a look of displeasure, even anger. Whatever it was, Thane saw it too, and it made him swear out loud right there, standing at attention, a commander right in front of him. A few people gasped, but Harn didn't reprimand Thane. Instead, with a gesture, Harn released everyone from attention. Cadets crowded close, blocking Siena's view at first, but she pushed through until she could see inside the open panel of Thane's cannon and realized just why everyone had begun muttering and looking around suspiciously. The wires inside had been cut. Straight, clean the marks made it clear that this wasn't bad wiring or an accident. Someone had done it on purpose. But sabotage? Academy competition could be cutthroat. Up until then, everyone had apparently played fair. A chill ran along Siena's spine at the thought of it. How could anyone, much less an Imperial cadet, be so devoid of honor? She was Neretha, his voice sharp and cold as an ice pick. Whoever thought to improve class rankings through such a stunt will have cause for regret. He strode toward the main door panel, pressed his hand to it, and said, "How many cadets had access to this room? Alone, between Cadet Kyrell's last visit and this inspection?" The flat monotone of a synthesized voice replied, "One." "And who was that?" Harn barked. "LP-8828. Sienna had misheard the computer. She had to have. But then the computer continued, finishing its answer. "Cadet Sienna Rhee. I would never do such a thing." Sienna swore, in Commandant Dean Lark's office, as she stood at attention before his long obsidian desk. Not to anyone, but especially not to Thane. And why not? He was your only competition for the top rank in the class, yes? But he's my friend. Friendship rarely endures ambition. Sienna's stomach churned so violently she had to fight not to be sick on the floor. This nightmare had swallowed her whole. Not only had she seen Thane's shocked look of dismay, not only had the entire class glared at her as she was hastily marched out of the repair bay, but also, and worst of all, her honor was in tatters, and she didn't know whether she could salvage it. What happens if I'm thrown out of the academy? Her thoughts raced wildly while she maintained her rigid posture and best attempt at outward composure. I'll never become an Imperial officer. Maybe I could still get work as a pilot, but I couldn't return home to Jelucan, not ever. My parents couldn't even allow me in the house without the rest of the kindred shunning us. No, she couldn't put her mother and father through that. If she were expelled, Sienna would have to travel to some completely unknown planet and start over, completely alone. The doors of Dean Lark's office slid open, and the Commandant barked, "We're still dealing with this situation." "Sir?" "Yes, sir." Harn quickly stood at attention. But another cadet has stepped forward with critical information. The mixture of terror and hope flooding through her made Sienna unable to speak, even when Jude walked through the door, a tablet in her hands. Once Commandant Dean Lark motioned impatiently for Jude to begin, she SPO of Bespin TI-803 reporting in. A thorough review of the data reveals that at the time Cadet Ree supposedly entered the repair bay to tamper with Cadet Chiral's ship, she was in fact with me and her other roommate, Cadet Ideal, in our bunk. I pulled up data logs that show her leaving the martial arts arena, entering the lift, and coming into our room, and there is no correlating record of her departure. Sienna felt almost faint with relief, but Dean Lark continued to frown. Data logs can themselves be tampered with, Cadet Edavon. Jude nodded. It is my belief that someone not only sabotaged Cadet Chiral's ship, but also the repair bay computer in order to make it look as though Cadet Ree was the one responsible. In short, sir, I believe she was framed. Your beliefs are meaningless without evidence, Cadet Edavon, said the Commandant. Sienna didn't dare hope that Jude and Kendi's testimony on its own could clear her. If so, wouldn't he have said so already? Sir, I hesitate to name the person who seems to be responsible for this sabotage, because while the data is clear, it is not absolute proof. Jude's fingers tightened around the tablet, as if she were afraid the information would be snatched from her. Why are you holding back? Sienna wanted to shout. We did this to me. Commandant Dean Lark stood up, and he was tall enough to tower over even the willowy Jude. Report your findings. Jude gave Sienna an apologetic glance. Sir, it appears that the person responsible for framing Cadet Ree was Cadet Thane Chiral himself. No. Sienna refused to believe that. There had to be another answer. Jude must have misunderstood the data. But nobody was better at getting into the inner workings of computers than Jude. Thane was the only other competitor for the top slot, and mechanical repair was one of his main weaknesses. If he hadn't done well on the project and had feared he would fail, he could have cut the wires of his own machine to disguise his inability to repair it. By framing Sienna for the sabotage, he would not only avoid being marked down for failing the project, but also drag her down so far she'd never be number one in the class. This isn't as simple as class rank, though. This could get me expelled. Thane wouldn't do that to me, not ever. And yet Jude stood there with the proof glowing on the datapad in her hands. Chapter 6. "W. did the Commandant say?" Nash asked Thane. "Just to come to the office." Thane resealed his uniform jacket, making himself ready for the meeting. "Do you think he'll offer you another chance at the laser cannon?" Ved lay back on his bunk, hardly even pretending to be concerned about what happened to Thane's class rank. At the moment, Thane cared about his rank even less than Ved did. "I think he's going to tell me what really happened." Nash raised an eyebrow. "You still think Sienna didn't screw with your engine, even though there's proof?" "It's not like her," Thane said shortly as he walked toward the door. He wasn't 100% sure Sienna was innocent that data had pointed to her, and Thane had to admit data within the Academy computers was difficult to falsify. However, he felt at least 95% sure. Not only did Thane trust her, he understood what kind of person she was and where she came from. Sure, plenty of Academy cadets would cheat to get ahead. But Sienna, a girl of the Gelukani Valleys, she would die before doing anything dishonorable. Surely she would never betray anyone, much less him. They meant too much to each other for that. Still, he felt that 5% uncertainty, and he'd never doubted Sienna before, even for a second. When Thane walked into Commandant Dienlark's office, he was surprised to see Sienna standing there at full attention. At first, he was glad. Good. We can smooth this over and move on. And then he realized that she refused to meet his eyes. Was that out of discipline or guilt? "Cadet Kyrell, Cadet Ree, we have a conundrum on our hands." The Commandant never rose from his chair as he studied them standing side by side, rigid and correct. "The first layer of data says that Cadet Ree is the only possible culprit for the tampering Diskov. Fred Tadao. That Cadet Kyrell tampered with his laser cannon himself and framed Cadet Ree for the deed. Thane had not known you could feel the blood drain from your face. It was like going numb from cold. Sir, I absolutely did not. I would never. Spare me your protestations, Cadet Kyrell." By then, Dienlark seemed more bored than anything else. "I have consulted with our specialists, who inform me that either layer of data could be the falsified one. One of you attempted to sabotage the other, and covered your tracks. Not well enough to hide completely, but enough that we can never be certain which of you is responsible and which is innocent. Therefore, we have no other recourse but to punish you both." Good pilot though he was, Thane had occasionally crashed a flight simulator. As the screens had showed him the images of flames and a planetary surface rushing up to smash him to atoms, he'd wondered what it would feel like to crash and burn for real. BD? Probably it was something like this. Commandant Dienlark smiled thinly. "You have both failed the laser cannon assignment. Your course rankings will reflect this. Their ranks were high enough that even a failure of that scale wouldn't take them down further than the second quartile. Still, it stung. Yet normally, the Commandant continued, a violation of the honor code would call for disciplinary hearings and potential expulsion. As we cannot any closer to the truth, however, this would prove useless. Although I have punished you both, I'm not willing to expel two gifted pilots based on such murky information. You will both continue on as cadets. Rest assured, however, if any similar incident arises during your time at the academy, for either or both of expulsion will be immediate and permanent. Do you understand? You. Yes, sir, Thane and Sienna said in unison. Her voice sounded as hollow as his, W-bits old. They walked out of Dean Lark's office suite in silence. From there, one of the top floors of the academy building, the view through the green-tinted windows showed what seemed to be half of Coruscant. A few benches and chairs were located there for junior officers, students, and visitors, so that when they saw the city spread before them, they would recognize the Commandant's power. No one was visiting this evening, however. Thane and Sienna were alone. As if they had rehearsed in advance, they both walked to the windows before they turned to each other. When their eyes met, she exhaled in the deepest relief. You didn't do. Neither did you. He ought to have known that all along. They smiled at each other, faith restored, but the problem wasn't solved. Thane sagged back against one of the metal columns between the windows. So who the hell did? Sienna scowled. Somebody who wanted top marks on the project. Probably that snake Ved Foslo? I'm not as sure about that. Ved's good with mechanical stuff. He would have placed in the top echelon even without cheating. So why bother? Besides, he's a stickler for rules, even when they work against him. So who would frame us both and try to make us hate each other? Her face looked stricken. Sabotaging the cannon and the data wasn't just scheming to get ahead. Someone wanted to hurt us. Who in their class had a grudge against them both? Nobody personally hated them, as far as Thane knew, which maybe wasn't far enough. It has to be because we're both at the top of the class. Sienna groaned. You mean we were? This knocks us so far down. Only for now. He realized he'd balled his hands into fists. We have to figure out who really did this. Once we turn that person in, we'll get our rankings back and get the jerk thrown out. Nobody who would do something like this deserves to be an Imperial officer, she said, lifting her chin. You're right. We get to the truth, and then we make the guilty party pay. Thane nodded. Outside, ships and hoverbikes darted through the misty sunset of the city. Okay, how do we begin? Jude agreed to help them, though as they sat at one of the spare data stations later that night, she warned, my earlier analysis wrongly implicated Thane. Thermie skills must be called into question. 4. Don't say that. Sienna put one hand on her friend's shoulder. You found the wrong solution because someone set you up to find it. Now that you know you need to dig deeper, I bet you'll get the answer in no time. Right, Thane? She shot him a look, and he nodded, as if he hadn't argued the exact same thing about Jude's abilities outside the Commandant's office when Sienna first suggested they try this. But she believed in her friend. If they were going to find the truth, Jude would be their best guide. Jude worked at her terminal for several minutes while no one spoke, or hardly even moved. The only sound in the enormous data analysis room was the soft tapping of Jude's fingers' only light. Came from the dozens of terminals vacant at that late hour, all of them glowing faintly blue. Sienna glanced over at Thane once to find him already looking at her. Once their eyes met, he turned his head, abashed. For some reason, that made her cheeks grow hot. With determination, she focused her attention on figuring out who the most likely culprits could be. Anyone might have wanted to knock them lower in the rankings, but attempting to pit them against each other, that was someone aiming to inflict pain. We outsmarted them, though. Her heart swelled with pride and other emotions harder to name as she glanced sideways at Thane again. It takes more than that to break us apart. Jude frowned, wrinkling her long freckled nose. The paths taken by the saboteur are quite circuitous. I traced the information about Thane, and it's as if they wanted to make it look like a higher official here at the Academy was responsible. Sienna had to shake her head. Lie after lie after lie. When I find out who did this, I'm going to ask them why they ever thought they'd be able to frame an instructor and get away with it. Not an instructor. Someone in the Office of Student Outcomes, Jude clarified. So what? An instructor? An administration official? Whoever, it was still a stupid move. But Thane straightened in his chair, realization dawning on his face. Do you guys know what the Office of Student Outcomes does? Sienna had never even heard of it. Jude replied, They oversee student performance and suggest methods for instructors to use in order to provide maximum improvement. Then she added with a shrug, But I have no idea precisely how they accomplish that. Apparently they do it by screwing with our minds. Thane pushed himself back from the data terminal, as angry as Sienna had ever seen him. I.O. ban Faye. Someone needed to remain rational. Thane, she said, think about what you're saying. Why would anyone on the Academy staff want to set us up? Because they don't want two cadets from a backwater world to beat all the military brats. Because General Foslow or Admiral Jeston or someone like that told them to knock us down so their kid could be number one. Thane got to his feet, expression dark. Even though she understood why Thane would be on edge, Sienna felt annoyed. Why are you turning this into some big conspiracy theory? Jude, who had been sitting silently at her terminal, chimed in, It is a conspiracy of some sort. The only question is who should. Nobody would be stupid enough to set up an official at the Academy, Thane ranted. Nobody's smart enough to set this up in the first place anyway. So that means the student outcomes people have to have done it. You can't be serious. Cold fear began to pool inside her. Thane was edging past understandable anger into dangerous territory. You did not question the methods of the Academy. Ist Baral. Yeah, I'm serious. They took a bribe or something? How many credits do you think it costs to buy your kid the top rank in the class? However much that is, it's as much as the Academy thinks we're worth. You realize you're making a criminal allegation, don't you? Sienna retorted. He shot back, What? Are you going to report me? Jude sat very still at her terminal, her eyes moving back and forth between them as they argued. Sienna knew they ought to tone it down at least until they were alone, but she was too angry to do that, and so was Thane. I'm not going to report you, but you need to remember why we're here and who we serve. You think everything the Academy and the Empire do is perfect, and you think every authority figure is evil-like. Thane's eyes went wide, and she knew she'd wounded him. He stepped toward her. Don't ever father up to me again. It's none of your business. Got that? Bring my. He'd never told her anything in his life was none of her business. They knew everything about each other. They kept no secrets. Now Thane had put up a barrier where there had never been one before, a wall of stone, and Sienna felt like she'd just slammed into it at top speed. You realize we have to confront them about this, he continued, because apparently he was so angry he'd lost his mind. You want us to accuse Academy officials of dishonesty? Oh, B. Yes. I want them to admit what they've done and take it back. That's our only chance at getting our ranks reinstated. They're not going to reinstate us after something like that. They'd expel us so fast we wouldn't even have time to pack our bags. You won't even try? You'd rather lie down in the dirt than admit your precious teachers could do something wrong? Sienna wanted to shake him. We would only make things worse, Thane. So you want me to just take it? Just accept whole first term here at the Academy was a waste. As if everything they'd learned, done, and seen was wasted just because of their stupid course rankings. Infuriated, she shot back. Yes, I do. You need to let go, learn to deal, and grow up. He stared at her, open-mouthed, with nothing but scorn in his eyes, then said, I never thought you were a coward. That stung. I never thought you were unfit for Imperial service. Now, though, I have to wonder. Spare me your analysis, okay? We're done here. With that, he turned to walk out. Sienna both wanted to be rid of him and didn't want to leave things like this. So she called, Don't you want to see what else Jude digs up? She's not going to dig up anything else. We have our answer. You're just too naive to believe it. Thane's voice dripped with contempt. It scoured her raw. She said nothing more as he stalked out. It felt as if a bomb had gone off. Sienna sensed this incident had only been the trigger, that some drastic change had been waiting to happen between them for a long time. But she'd never dreamed it would lead to a confrontation so ugly. A crevasse had opened in their friendship, and Thane stood on the other side. No longer could she believe he loved the Empire as she did. No longer could she trust in his understanding and support. Somehow Sienna already knew things between them would never be the same. Well, Jude sounded awkward, so I did keep looking, and it seems like the trail ends at student outcomes. That doesn't mean they're guilty. The office may only have been a convenient rerouting for the original sabotage of the data records. And of course the rest of the repair bay info has been erased. I'm afraid my search ends here. Sienna nodded. The data terminals before her blurred, and she wiped away hot tears with the heel of her hand. Jude continued, We should focus our efforts on improving your class rank in future, so you can make up for this loss. Suddenly she stood up, less prim than she'd ever been before, and hugged Sienna tightly. Then it was finally all right for Sienna to cry. Chapter 7. F. Or the Academy cadets, the next 2.5 years seemed both to last forever and to rush by in a blur. As the exams grew more demanding, the flying more difficult, and the discipline more exacting, the bunks began to empty out. The lineups tightened formation again and again. The corridors seemed less crowded as more and more students flunked out or simply gave up. Both Thane Kyrell and Sienna Rhee were too tough for that. They still both aimed for the top slot in the class. Every term, which meant they clashed with each other time and time again. In Core World's classical culture, who here can tell me which opera the composer Eigern is best known for? Sienna's hand shot up, and when the professor nodded at her, she answered, "Chalice and altar." "Very good, Cadet Ree. And can you tell me the themes for which this opera is famed?" Uh-oh. She could hum several melodies from Chalice and Altar, but she didn't enjoy opera music. That made it difficult for her to connect music to plot. After only a moment's pause, the professor turned away. "Memorizing by rote, Cadet Ree. Unfortunate. Does anyone else know?" The sound of Thane's voice from behind her pierced her like a knife between the shoulder blades. He said, "The opera deals with the morality of self-sacrifice and the repression of desire." "Excellent, Cadet Kyrell." It was like Sienna could feel Thane's smug smile burning through her back. She gritted her teeth and resolved to listen to opera every single night until the next culture exam. Candy and Jude could just deal Drod his yacht JD 201 with it. Go! In destroyer-level craft operations, all other efforts have failed, intoned the professor from the mock captain's chair of the Star Destroyer simulator. Our vessel has been boarded. Battles rage on every level, and we cannot let our enemies take the ship. Therefore, we must self-destruct. Which of the three methods of self-destruct should we choose? Thane swiveled around in his console chair. We should set the automatic self-destruct, using the codes given to the three top officers. The automatic gives us the longest time to detonation, which means more of our troops will be able to make it to escape pods. The professor steepled his hands in front of him. An interesting choice. Does anyone see any problems with Cadet Kyrell's scenario? Sienna lifted her head from her view screen. Yes, sir. If the ship has been so thoroughly infiltrated by the enemy, there is no guarantee that the three top officers will all be on the bridge, or even alive. Also, the extra time to detonation will only give our enemies a greater chance to escape as well. Very good, Cadet Ree. What would you suggest instead? Not the core engine method, which would require us to have easy access to the engine room again, not guaranteed during intraship combat. Instead, we should go for the captain's word method. The captain signals for all to abandon ship, seals herself on the bridge with a specific password or phrase known only to her, and weapons at enemy vessels, and provide cover for escape pods. She then pilots the ship into the nearest planetary object, star, or singularity. Sienna lifted her chin in thinly concealed pride. That means the captain must die with her ship, the instructor said. Yes, sir, Sienna replied, but all Imperial officers should be prepared to sacrifice their lives to do their duty. Excellent, Cadet Ree. The instructor smiled at her. That old creep never smiled at anybody. Your answer is the one I find ideal in a tactical sense, and a moral sense as well. Thane clenched his hands around the edges of the control panel to keep himself from making a gesture recognized on most worlds as extremely rude. Exedi. Moral. What was moral about blowing yourself up, when you could just as easily escape with your life and come back to fight another day? Thane fumed over that the rest of the afternoon, including in hand-to-hand combat, where his temper fueled his punches until he hit Ved too hard. That meant he not only got a demerit, but also had to promise Ved all his dessert credits for a week to make amends. Screwing up in hand-to-hand was his own fault, and Thane knew it, but he couldn't help feeling like it was yet another mess he Maybe she still bought into the idea of the Empire as the perfect state, every single planet's population singing its praises non-stop. Thane had learned better. Although the official information channels spoke of building projects, successful trade negotiations, and endless economic prosperity, he knew that shine was mostly gloss. The Empire built new bases to solidify its control. Its trade negotiations always seemed to result in the Empires getting everything it wanted on terms that couldn't possibly have benefited the planet in question. And as for the mood of the populace, even the official information channels had begun spitting venom about a small group of terrorists who plotted evil and called themselves rebels. Thane had nothing but contempt for terrorists, but he also understood that such dissident factions rarely came out of nowhere. They were a reaction to the Empire's increasing control. An overreaction, definitely, but proof that not everybody accepted the Emperor's rule. Despite his disenchantment, Thane had no plans to leave Imperial service. How else would he get to fly the greatest ships in the galaxy? Smaller employers could also be corrupt, and the work would be less certain. With the Imperial fleet, Thane was guaranteed decent pay, access to top-of-the-line ships, and regular promotions. Best of all, he'd never have to live on Jellucan again. So it was without envy that he saw Sienna Ree assigned to command track. His own track elite flight suited him far better. He even welcomed the fact that he and Sienna shared fewer classes after they divided into tracks. Thane felt relieved that he didn't have to see her every day any longer. Sometimes even looking at her hurt. No. It irritated him, angered him. It didn't hurt. Or so he told himself. All Thane knew was that since their rift over the fake sabotage incident more than 2 years prior, he and Sienna had never been able to patch things up completely. The humiliation he'd felt when she brought up his father that she would suggest anything he did came from his father. It still stung every time he saw Jude Etivan. Sienna had stopped confiding in him, which felt cold and strange. He wondered if she'd become so fanatical about her imperial duty that she took his distrust of the Academy's methods as a personal insult. How stupid would that be? Nor could he forget that she'd refused to challenge their superior officers, leaving his class ranks severely damaged. It wasn't as if he hated Sienna or anything, and he didn't think she hated him either. But neither of them cheered for the other in races any longer, or offered congratulations after a tournament win. They didn't hang out during the scant free time Academy rigor allowed. But occasionally, at the least convenient moments, the enduring connection between them would make itself known. Ashes would become embers. One day, only a few months before graduation, Thane headed back to the uniform dispensary, a trip he'd made at least once each term. He'd finally stopped growing, which was a relief, because he topped out as the third tallest member of their class, only a hair beneath Nash. But his body was now adding muscle to bone, broadening his chest and shoulders, which meant new uniform jackets. He was only thinking how tight and uncomfortable his current jacket was when he turned the corner and saw Sienna standing farther down the corridor, still in her loose black shorts and gray tank from E in a class. Instead of her usual proud bearing, she leaned against the wall and held one hand to her face. Even without glimpsing her expression, Thane knew she was upset. In that instant, he suddenly remembered something he hadn't thought of in years, the day he'd met Sienna so long before. When the other boys had mocked her as she stood in the hangar in her plain brown dress, Thane had thought of her as an autumn leaf, fallen and fragile. He'd learned Sienna Ree was anything but fragile, yet he thought of the autumn leaf now. "Hey," he said. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped toward her. "Are you all right?" Sienna startled, straightening up as she tried to compose herself. She hadn't been weeping, but Thane could see the glimmer of unshed tears in her eyes. "I'm fine," she said hoarsely. "Thanks. You checked on her. She's good. Duty done. Get out of here." Thane hesitated, on the verge of turning to go, but then he couldn't. "You don't look fine." She made a strange sound, half laugh, half sob. "It's stupid. What? I got a hollow from my parents. The Moonyak died. The one you used to ride up to the fortress sometimes, when we were little." Thane had not spoken of the fortress in years. Sienna nodded. "Yeah, him. He was pretty old, and I knew when I came here I'd probably never see him again, but still." She rolled her eyes, mocking her own emotions. "Stupid to get upset, huh? It's not stupid. That Moonyak was great. Thane had ridden him a couple of times, too. He remembered being a child and sitting on the beast's broad furry back, his arms looped around Sienna's waist, both of them laughing in mingled delight and terror as the Moonyak nimbly walked a narrow ridge alongside the mountain. She smiled. It had been a long time since Thane had seen her smile at him and mean it. He wasn't he? "Yeah, bah!" Their eyes met, and for a moment it was as if the past couple of years had fallen away. But then Sienna's expression dimmed. Her posture became more rigid, and she said, formally, "Thank you for your concern. If you'll excuse me, I need to change for my amphibious battle tactics study group." Thane held his hands in front of him, a pushback motion. "You're excused." She always did that when cold and shut him out again. He told himself he was used to it, that he'd long since stopped caring. Still, the entire way to the dispensary, Thane couldn't stop thinking of the fortress they'd created together and how he used to sit up there, waiting for his one true friend. He always did that, acted nice, just long enough for Sienna to forget how he'd lashed out at her. She'd start confiding in him the way she used to, then catch herself as she remembered how thoroughly Thane had shut her out. As she sat in her study group, watching hollows of real amphibious invasions from history, Sienna brooded on that odd, fractured encounter with Thane. She wished she hadn't gone so cold, but it seemed like every time she tried to be herself with him, he turned away. What had she done that was so wrong? He was the one who had gone crazy after the stupid Cannon project 2.5 years before, assuming there was some mass conspiracy at work. He was the one who would have dragged them into an administrative hearing based on no evidence, which would have resulted in their immediate expulsion. And sometimes he seemed so offended when she beat him on tests or challenges that Sienna felt like he couldn't believe that someone so inferior had bested him. Did he still consider her nothing but a little valley waif? At Hamid Blat Sid. Maybe he'd always seen their friendship as an act of charity. All those